Okay, this is the October 2021 regular meeting of the Fairhaven Zoning Board of Adjustment. Adequate notice of this meeting has been given pursuant to the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act. At the time of the board's reorganization in January of this year, the board adopted its regular meeting schedule for the year. Notice of the schedule of the board's regular meetings was sent to and published in the Asbury Park Press and was also sent to the Two River Times and the Star Ledger. Tonight's meeting was listed in the notice of the schedule of regular meetings. That notice was also posted on the bulletin board in Borough Hall and has remained continuously posted there as required by the statute. In addition, a copy of the notice is and has been available to the public and is on file in the office of the Borough Clerk. A copy of the notice has also been sent to such members of the public as have requested such information in accordance with the statute. Adequate notice having been given, the board secretary is directed to include this statement in the minutes of the meeting.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, we should also indicate for the record that as a result of the fact that we began the year conducting our meetings via Zoom, and then at one point in time went back to a live meeting, we issued a supplemental Open Public Meetings Act notice in the usual course, publication, posting, delivery to the clerk, posting on the website when we went back live. And then subsequent to that live meeting, we have now gone back to meeting via Zoom, and we issued a second supplemental Open Public Meetings Act notice indicating that we would be conducting our meetings via Zoom for the rest of the year until and unless otherwise noticed to the contrary. And that second supplemental Open Public Meetings Act notice was also given in the usual course by posting, publication, delivery to the clerk, and placing it on the website. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, before proceeding with the formal meeting tonight, I'd like to say a few words to the applicants that are experts in the audience about the role and authority of the Fairhaven Zoning Board of Adjustment. The board is a separate and independent municipal legal entity, and its limited authority is specifically set forth in the borough ordinances and the New Jersey municipal land use law. It is quasi-judicial in nature, and the members of the board are unpaid volunteers appointed by the mayor and council. The zoning board does not enact the borough land use laws and regulations. The borough council does that. The zoning board does not enforce the land use laws of the borough of Fairhaven. This is the responsibility of the borough code enforcement officer. This board deals with appeals for relief from the requirements of the borough's land use laws or denials by the zoning officer. An applicant is never entitled to a variance, also known as an exception to the zoning regulations, but must meet specific criteria required by the New Jersey municipal land use law and the Fairhaven ordinances by satisfying certain required standards of proof. The board has no authority to waive these requirements. The burden of proof is always upon the applicant to show that he or she is entitled to the specific relief requested. The applicant must prove that a deviation from the regulations will advance the purposes of the ordinance and that the deviation would substantially outweigh any detriment to the zone plan. Variances relate to the future use of the land and are not intended or authorized to remedy temporary or unique personal situations. Roll call, please, Sandy.
Mr. Nick Chesney. Mrs. Quigley.
Here.
Mr. Ridgway. Mr. Ryan.
Here.
Mr. Ledman.
Here.
Dr. Lawfer.
Here.
Mr. Kinsella. Mr. Chiavetti.
Here.
Mr. Leader.
Here. Would you please join me in a salute to the flag? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Matter of housekeeping, Mike, I see that the first matter on the agenda is old business, the McElduff matter. Status, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we received a letter from applicant's counsel, Mark Akins, earlier today, indicating that the applicant, Mr. McElduff, 31 Heights Terrace, was withdrawing the application without prejudice. I would normally, when we have an actual withdrawal letter, I don't I don't want to bill the escrow to do a short resolution that says it's dismissed because it was withdrawn. We have the withdrawal letter. But I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that the board take a motion to dismiss the matter without prejudice, because we haven't reached a determination on the merits, to dismiss the matter as a result of the applicant's withdrawal of the application. And we can keep the letter and the minutes in the file. So if anyone looks in the future, they'll know what happened to the application.
So moved.
Second,
Second by Ms. Quigley.
Mike, we spent a lot of time on this. Are we able to know why this was withdrawn?
His letter does not indicate why it was withdrawn. So generally, if someone wants to withdraw an application, the board's going to allow it. Sometimes what an applicant will try and do, if they actually conclude the matter, and there's some discussion by the board members immediately prior to a vote, if an applicant doesn't like the way the discussion seems to be going, they may jump up and say, I'm withdrawing my application. I suggest at that point, the board doesn't have to allow it to be withdrawn. It can actually vote on it. And that would be an action on the merits. But here we only got partway into it. They were going to revise the plans. They never came back. I'm not sure. There's nothing in the letter that indicates the circumstances. Let's just put it that way.
So that means then if anything that he does going forward must be within code.
Unless he comes back and files another application, which he has a right to do.
Thank you.
Dr. Laufer, the withdrawal without prejudice means that they can come back with the same application again, in fact. So really it's status quo, as if they never started.
Thank you.
Okay, we had a motion, we had a second. Sandy, did we have a roll call?
Mrs. Quigley,
yes.
Mr. Ridgway.
Yeah.
Mr. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. Ledman,
Yes.
Dr. Laufer,
Yes.
Mr. Chiavetti,
Yes.
Mr. Leader.
Yes. Before we proceed to new business, I got a text from Betsy Koch saying that she's having trouble logging in. Sandy, I asked her to email you. I want to know if you have any other emails or whether we have a Betsy issue or a public connection issue.
I don't have any other emails. It could be that she was logging in while we were still in the practice session, because you can't get in until the practice session is ended and we move into the webinar. So I will email her the information again.
Yeah, why don't you resend her the link and
Yeah.
we'll see. And Betsy, well, she can't hear me because she.
Yeah.
When you email her though, Sandy, you could ask her to shoot you an email back confirming that she's received it. And I should indicate, Mr. Chairman, that just looking at on the bottom of the screen here where we can pull up the number of participants. So right now on the screen, the board members and Sandy, there's 5, 10, 12 of us, and there shows 21 participants. So there are obviously other folks logged on and we're able to do so.
Okay, barring a problem that we learn of through email communications, let's proceed. The first matter of new business on the agenda for tonight is the Burke matter. If you're here for the Burke matter, if you could please use the raise your hand feature and we will pull all of you up to the dais at one time.
Hi. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to comment on the Burks.
No, Mr. Bogan, we're not ready for comment. You're not.
Okay.
Yeah, you're looking to make a comment with regard to the application?
Right.
Okay, well, just stick around. We're going to hear what they have to say first, and then we'll welcome your comments at the end.
So I'm going to change your role back to attendee because you're not part of the application, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Let the record reflect, I got a thumbs up from Betsy, translated. I believe that means she's on. Mr. Sardo, isn't that a new approach?
Yes. It's not my preference, but when the clients are here, that's, I'm in the meeting room, so. Yeah, can you hear me okay, by the way?
You can't.
Great.
Mr. Sardo, we have Matthew Dubois and we have Highland Turner. This is your crew?
This is my crew and the applicant homeowners, Remy and John Burke, are with me here in my office.
Terrific. Michael?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, yes, we're going to swear in Ms. Gable, our professional planner. Ms. Gable, you do swear testimony to give the board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but truth?
I do.
And she's been sworn in. And Mr. Chairman, we'll let Mr. Sardo put his appearance on the record, even though we kind of sort of did that. And then I believe we have some completeness items that maybe Ms. Gable can walk us through after we have Mr. Sardo put his appearance on the record.
Thank you. John Sardo from the law firm of Giordano, Halloran and Ciesla on behalf of the applicant, John and Remy Burke.
Thank you.
So I don't know if you want.
Ms. Sardo, Mr. Chairman, do you want to have Ms. Gable address or walk us through the completeness items?
Please.
Sure. So a lot of these are the standard completeness waivers that the board grants. The first being the completed ownership disclosure statement. It's a homeowner application, so we recommend a waiver be granted. The next item is the Monmouth County Planning Board. The property does not front on a county road, so we recommend a waiver. The next item is Freehold Soil Conservation District. The applicant requested a waiver for this item, and we recommend that be granting. The board grant the waiver, and that the applicant should provide testimony to confirm whether or not this application and permit is required. The other item is the Monmouth County Health Department application. The applicant requested a waiver since it is not applicable, so we recommend the waiver be granted. Item number 16 from the checklist is copies of all easements, covenants, and deed restrictions, including the meets and bounds. The applicant requested a waiver for the item, and so we recommend it be granted for completeness purposes only, but should the board want that information, the applicant should provide it. And then moving on to application guidelines, the applicant requested a waiver from complete floor plan showing existing and proposed conditions since they are proposing to demolish the existing home. And so we recommend the waiver be granted for completeness purposes. The other item is elevations of all sides of structure with string dimensions. And the applicant has submitted the elevations for all sides of the structure, but only the rear and front elevations have string dimensions. And they requested the waiver for this item. From adding.
Ms. Gable, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think the sheet AO2 of the revised plans, yeah, they do have the string dimensions run across both front, rear, and side elevations.
Okay. I think you're correct, Mr. Sardo. Yes, that would be correct. Well, they're still on the front and the rear, and they are, next to where the side elevations are on the plans. So, we still recommend that, the waiver be granted for completeness purposes. And then the other item has to do with the existing detached garage. The previous architectural plans that we reviewed as part of our June letter, there weren't really many details about that accessory structure, and they requested a waiver from submitting those details since it's an existing structure that isn't proposed to change. And so we recommend that the waiver be granted since no changes are proposed to the detached existing garage. Two other items for completeness for the application guidelines include the location and type of the proposed attic access. The applicant requested a waiver since it's not shown on the floor plans, but note that the attic will be provided in the upstairs hall with the drop-down ladder. And on the revised plans that were just submitted about a week and a half ago, the attic access still isn't shown. However, the applicant should provide testimony pertaining to where the attic access will be proposed during the course of tonight's hearing. And then the other item is the statement of legal basis for the granting of the variances sought. The applicant requested a waiver for this item, noting that they will be providing testimony during the hearing. And then as for the zoning officer's letter, the applicant has provided that information as requested.
Mr. Sardo, what's the basis of requesting the waiver on the addition of the attic access to the plans?
I think at the time of submission, it just was not on the plan set, and then we'll testify to it. It's going to make its way on the plans, and it was just an oversight on the resubmission of the plans not to have it included.
And how about title? Title was requested and you didn't provide title?
It was not, no.
Is there a reason that you were unable to provide? It's a very odd lot. I would be interested in knowing that there's no strange easements or anything. It would normally pique my interest, but I'm equally interested in knowing why it wouldn't have been shared.
Well, to my knowledge, there are no strange or unusual easements. None are identified on the survey which was submitted. As far as, I don't think there's any covenants or restrictions of record in the chain of title, but certainly the applicants here, they could confirm that, but certainly I would agree to submit a title binder to the board if that's requested as a condition.
Elena, what were the other omissions with regard to the plans? String dimensions, we have them now. Is that correct or not correct?
The location of the string dimensions are shown on the rear and the front elevation. And indicating floor to ceiling height, first floor to second floor, and total building height are shown. It's not necessarily on the side elevations, but it's close enough to the center between where the front and the side elevations are shown on the plans.
I'm going to ask you to listen to the application, and I'm going to ask you to advise us at the end whether or not you think there's any omissions with regard to the plans that we should condition any action on tonight, so that we're sure that the plans properly reflect what we're discussing, because by not showing it on the plans, that can create confusion with the construction department. And I don't want that. They don't listen to our testimony, and they, hopefully will read our resolution, but it won't be in the field with them. Were there any other omissions of that nature?
Can I just interrupt you? I apologize, but it goes to the string dimension. Elena, do you see that the hash lines do carry across the page, so that on the left and right side elevations, you would see where this, the second floor, the first floor, where all those are, it just carries across the page.
Yes, I see that. They do carry across the page, but I think that should the board act favorably as a condition of approval, can you just copy and paste those numbers next to the left and right side elevations on the architecturals?
Happy to do that.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
May I ask a question, please? This is a strange shaped lot. I looked at it a little bit closer today, getting ready for the hearing tonight. And do we have information or a picture, a survey of the detached garage? Because I had some problem trying to understand the two driveways into the property, one from, I believe, Kemp, and then one from Willow. And my question is whether we need to look at the entire lot, including the flag part going into the detached garage, even though they're not proposing to tear down the detached garage. I'm just wondering if we have information about its size, its position on the lot, a separate measurement perhaps for the flag entrance off of Kemp to help the board determine, whether it would be inclined to grant the relief sought.
Ms. Quigley, there is a survey. It is recent. It is, looks like the last revision date was December of 20. That was included in the package. It does have dimensions of the garage to the setbacks. Do you have the original email with the submissions?
I think I do. I will check my file.
And
So,
I was going to suggest that Matt, our engineer, will be able to bring up the plot plan and walk through those and walk you through everything.
Thank you.
my suggestion would be that, that we waive these conditions as to any prerequisites to proceeding. But, you know, with regard to the garage, it's a very large structure and it's in a weird location. I certainly don't believe that people should go out and do architecturals for the sake of spending money, but I don't know what questions might come up. So I think we can and should address that as we go through. But I would suggest that we go ahead and proceed with what we have tonight and see what the questions are. Any objection?
Nope.
We need a formal motion, Michael?
We can take a motion to grant the completeness waivers, and that's for purposes of completeness only. Obviously, if the board requires any of this information during the merits hearing, it has a right to request it. Likewise, if you want to condition any approvals on any of that information being provided, you can do so. But I'd suggest we take a motion to grant the completeness waivers.
So moved.
Second,
Mrs. Quigley,
yes.
Mr. Ridgway,
Yes.
Mr. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. Ledman,
Yes.
Dr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Chiavetti,
Yes.
and Mr. Leader.
Yes. All right, Mr. Sardo.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, we took care of notice, right, Mr. Irene?
Yeah, I've reviewed the notice materials, Mr. Chairman. Actually, we reviewed them at an earlier meeting of the board. We did not commence the hearing, but the application was submitted, the notice materials were submitted, the applicant had requested that the matter be carried, and we carried it without the necessity of renotice.
Very good.
So, Mr. Sardo, if you want to identify your first witness, we'll swear that person in and you can get going.
Sure, it's Matthew Dubois, our professional civil engineer from Nelson Engineering.
Okay. Is it Dubois or Dubois?
I pronounce it Dubois.
Dubois, that's what I thought. Okay. So,
My
Mr.
apologies.
Dubois, if you'd raise your right hand, I'm going to swear you in. You do swear your testimony, give the board to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And if you give us your full name, spell your last, your address for the record, please.
Yep, it's Matthew Dubois, D-U-B-O-I-S. I work for Nelson Engineering Associates. We're based out of Neptune, New Jersey, 444 Neptune Boulevard. I've been licensed by the state of New Jersey since 2010. Testified before lots of boards, including this one, although it was about 8 years ago for this.
And when you say licensed a professional
Licensed
engineer.
as a professional engineer.
Have you ever had your credentials rejected by any planning or zoning board or Superior Court in the state of New Jersey?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, is the board interested in hearing any further in terms of Mr. Dubois' credentials, or will you accept him as an expert in field professional engineer?
Any questions? We'll stipulate.
Okay. Ms.
Thank you.
Sardo,
Matt, have you prepared, did you prepare the plot plan that was submitted with this application?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And can you share that with the board on screen here?
I believe so. Let's see.
and while you're bringing this up, Mr. Dubois, this consists of 3 sheets. It's the plot plan that you prepared for Nelson Engineering. It's dated January 14, 2021, and no revision date, correct?
No revision date.
Okay, we're going to mark that as Exhibit A-1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Matt, can you advise the board? what
Actually,
zoning
no, there is a revision date of 4/30/21, and this I went to the wrong one. This is one I just made yesterday.
Okay, well, did we get that?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, so I'm looking at an old one? Or do I not see the revision date online?
It'd be just above where it says plot plan with the number 1.
Yeah, I'm looking there. Mine doesn't seem to have it unless I'm not looking at a current one.
Are you looking at the survey perhaps?
It says plot plan. Now, they may have gone in electronically and I may be looking at the set that I originally received. Paper copies, and that's fine, as long as the board members have them.
I do not have this version. This version looks like it's dated 10/6/21. I haven't received that version. The version that I reviewed has a revision date of April 30th, 2021.
April 30th is the one we submitted.
Okay,
Yeah, that's reflected in your June review letter.
correct.
Mhm.
Well, but doesn't this one have a revision date of October?
Yes, this is when I was preparing yesterday. Just, I didn't realize we had the front yard setback variance for the stairs, so I was updating our zone table.
Oh, yeah, okay, so I think I can clarify the confusion that might be going on. So I received a call from Ms. Grable a few days ago, and she had asked if the bulk table was affected or impacted at all from the most recent architectural plan submission. And I advised that we'd be able to talk about that in our testimony today. So I think that's why Matt perhaps was bringing up this plan, but Matt, do you have the other plan available and ready to share with the board?
I can download it from our server if we've got about 2 minutes.
Well, let me ask you another question. Other than the bulk standard table that you've updated, are there any other changes to this plan at all compared to the plan set that you had previously submitted?
Just the dimensions also related to the bulk requirements. And also I removed the stairwell bump out that's not reflected on the new architectural plans.
Okay. How long do you think it's going to take you, Matt, to get the other plans up?
Really about 2 minutes. Let's see.
Well, can I ask Ms. Papa, are you able to share screen for the plans that are on file?
No, I cannot work from where I am, and I'm looking at my
Okay.
documents to see if I have a 10/6 document, and I don't see one.
Yeah, no, I apologize. You should not have the 10/6 document. It's the 4/30/21 is the one we've submitted and we're presenting on, and that's what I'm asking Matt now to bring up.
The document should also be posted on the borough's website too, if that would be easier to access.
I know where our server is. I haven't browsed to the borough's website yet. Okay, and I've got it now. So here's sheet 1 and here's sheet 2 of the 4/30/2021 plans.
Great. Okay, so this will be A1. Correct?
This meeting, the plot plan, 3 sheets dated January 14, 2021, revised through April 30, 2021.
That's correct.
Okay, A1, thank you.
Okay. Matt, can you identify what zone this is in and identify that on the key map to the board?
Yes, this is in the R10A zone. I'll just zoom in so everyone can see a little bit better. Then we're immediately adjacent to the R10B to the west and the R5 to the north.
Okay, thank you. And if you could go back, I guess, to the, or zoom out and perhaps just walk through, what the hash lines are showing the existing structure versus the proposed structure. And then perhaps also discuss the garage and the dimensions.
Hey, Mr. Sardo, I'm sorry to interrupt. Before we get started with regard to testimony, can you outline for the board the variances that are triggered by the application, just to tune everybody into what we're looking at, please?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. There are a couple variances we need. There's bulk C variances that we need relating to minimum front yard setback. The standard and requirement is 30 feet, whereas the existing house is almost 24 feet setback and the proposed house is 27.5. And that's not to the structure, but to the front steps of the porch. The side yard setback, the minimum requirement is 10 feet, whereas 6.7 is proposed, 6.87 exists. There's a combined side yard setback variance that's required. 25 feet is required for the zone, and we are proposing 17.7. And then we have the habitable floor area ratio. That is, the 2.8 is required, and we are at 0.30. We do not exceed the cap, which would be a C variance, but that we're in compliance with and under. Our proposed habitable floor area is 2,812 as shown on this plan. You'll hear testimony that's confirmed and cross-referenced with the architectural plans. And you'll also hear testimony, and Matt can confirm this, the HFA as revised now is 2,806. So it's a slight reduction versus what is in this bulk table that you're seeing right here. There's also some existing nonconformities as to lot size, 10,000 square feet required. This comes in slightly under. At 9,243 is existing. Also, it's a 50-foot wide lot, whereas a 100-foot wide lot is required, and another existing nonconformity.
So we've got one side yard, combined side yard, front yard, floor area ratio, 4 total.
Correct.
And with regard to the existing structure, I realize this is about to be a part of your testimony, but just to put all that into context, because you're mentioning the existing dimensions, did I hear correctly that the entire house is going to be demolished and you're starting over?
Yeah, that's correct. And it's really for reference. I understand that it's not, this isn't a case where we're doing an addition and we're holding those lines, so to speak, but you'll hear through discussion that in looking at the existing home and the condition of it, it really was considered that it's just more economical and a better proposal to knock it down and start over. So yes, you're correct in that assertion.
Mr. Sardo, how much of the existing foundation are you using?
No, we're not. It will be demolished.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for the indulgence. You were saying.
I was saying, where were we? Matt, we were going to look at the plot plan and just, I think also just show, now having the benefit of seeing what the variances are and hearing a little bit about it, the hash line, Matt, underneath.
Yes, this dash line right here is the outline of the existing structure. And then this dash line in the back is the existing patio. All of that's being removed and replaced by the new building, which is in this bold line.
Right, and so you'll see that the outline, Matt, if I guess you pointed out in the front yard particularly, you'll see that the house has been moved back significantly from the hash line to the proposed new structure, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then there is a driveway in the front there, Matt, if you could put your cursor over that. That's existing. Applicants proposing to leave that there, although we can talk more about that. I think there's some ability to maybe maneuver the home if that's something that the board would like to see as an accommodation. I think we could narrow that driveway. And then Matt, can you move to the rear? Thank you. So can you advise the board that I guess the floor area, the footprint of that garage, as well as the height of it?
The footprint isn't actually labeled, but it's a 710 square foot garage based on our survey.
And I think it's the existing, the peak of the roof might slightly exceed the what's permitted. I think 15 feet's permitted. It's slightly over that.
Yeah, that was slightly larger, 15 and a half.
Right. So that's pre-existing nonconformity that we're not proposing to do anything with the garage. And then Matt, it's not dimensioned there. I guess we can see the length of that driveway is 27.27 feet. Is that right?
That's to the property line, so it would be about another, it looks like 7 feet to the road. And I can
Okay.
verify that as well.
And then it's, it looks like 20 some odd feet, but I don't know if is that
And
approximately
35
right?
feet from the garage to the road.
Okay. And the width approximately, just in response to the board member's question?
And we've got 21 and a half feet wide and this section back here.
Okay.
Excuse me, is there any measurement of the distance between that garage that's being left in place and the house that exists on block 55, lot 6?
We don't have any data for the location of the house on lot 5
On lot 6,
or lot 6.
corner, so the one that's kind of surrounded by this property. I was just curious.
Do you have an aerial so we can get a general idea, but I don't have any actual dimension.
Yeah, so we do have an aerial that's based on that we've prepared that Matt can share, and I think that might be demonstrative. Are you able to share that, Matt?
Yep, just have to figure out which of these tabs. Here we go.
So do we know where this aerial came from? Is it Google Earth?
This is just Google Maps.
And is it dated?
It might have been, I downloaded this yesterday.
Okay, but you don't know the date of the Google Maps snap.
We can look that up as well.
Okay, I mean, if you have it, you have it. You have it. If you don't,
Yeah, it should show up as soon as I zoom in on the site.
okay.
The
Is there
While
an
you're
ability to cross, to measure the distance between the garage and the adjoining?
I don't know how accurate it is, but we can certainly give it a try.
well, do you do have a measurement on your plot plan to the existing house, right?
Not to the neighbor's house, only to the existing house on our lot.
Yeah, I'm actually asking Mr. Sarda for the distance between the existing garage on your lot and the house that's on the corner there that we see.
This is going to be roughly 51, 52 feet.
What was the testimony as to the height of the garage as it sits?
That's 15 and a half feet where 15 is required.
And what is the fireplace in the garage?
I'm not actually familiar with the interior of the garage. We might need the applicant to speak on that.
So can I stand up and
Do
speak?
you want to just tell me what it is, or you can come up?
Yeah, it was the old barn.
We're gonna have to.
Yeah, let's do that. Why don't you come up here, John?
All right, before we do that, the aerial we're gonna mark as Exhibit A-2. And so we don't lose sight of it, I assume, Mr. Dubois, that the plot plan was based on that survey that was submitted?
Plot plan is based on the survey.
Right, so we're gonna mark the survey prepared by Robert H. Morris, Morris PLS of Nelson Engineering Associates, consisting of one sheet. dated October 11, 2019, revised through December 20, 2020. We're going to make that A-3 so we don't lose sight of that. And now you want to have Mr. Burke sworn, is that right, Mr. Soto?
Yes, that's correct. I'll
Okay,
ask
so
him to come up.
Mr. Burke, would you give us your full name, spell your last, and your address for the record, please? Mr. Burke, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
So if you give us your full name, spell your last, and your address for the record, please?
John Burke, B-U-R-K-E, 104 Willow Street, Fairhaven.
Okay, and we're going to swear you in. You just swear your testimony you give the board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. The chimney in the barn was apparently what was left over from the orchard farm. That is what makes up the River Oaks area. The house that we now live in was the farmhouse, and what we're referring to as the garage in the back was the functioning barn for the farm, for the farmer. The foundation that we have, I think, is 118 years old, so that's how far back that goes. I don't know what that chimney was for. We've never used it for anything. It could have been for a potbelly stove if you kept heat in there, but from my end, it's never been utilized for anything at all.
Do you have any pictures? I'm looking at the pictures you submitted with the application. I don't see any pictures of the interior. I understand that you're not doing any work in the garage, and so it isn't a part of the application. However, it's a very large structure, and you're proposing variances in terms of the overall size of what you propose to replace the main house with. What's in there?
In the garage?
Yeah.
I keep my tools in there, bicycles.
No,
that's-
I don't actually mean the contents.
Oh.
It's a 700 square foot structure. Are there rooms? Is there a second story? The chimney, does it land at a device or a furnace or?
No, the chimney doesn't do anything, and there is nothing in there. We just store things in it. As if it was a garage, but it's a barn. There is an attic area upstairs that we also store stuff in.
Is there any habitable space in the garage, Mr. Burke?
No,
Are there any utilities to the garage?
there was electricity when we moved in.
Is there
Glass
still,
fuses.
is there still electricity?
Yeah, glass fuses. Yeah,
Okay. No water or sewer service to the garage?
no,
No heat source other than whatever that chimney was?
no.
Thank you.
Mr. Burke, I noticed that you have two driveways. Do both driveways access the garage?
No,
Do you use the garage for your cars?
no.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Was there thought given to tearing the garage down, Mr. Burke?
No, we hadn't considered that.
Elena, we have an ordinance that limits the footprint of a garage relative to the footprint of the house. You familiar with it?
Yes, it's for specific zones.
I just want to make sure we're in compliance.
Yeah, give me a second to look it up and I'll let you know. Yeah, let me try to see if I can find it. If I know that it's only for certain zones about accessory structure, floor area, no greater than a certain percentage of the principal structure. I'm not sure if it's applicable in this zone though. So
Thank
give me 1 second, I'll get back to you.
All right, Mr. Sardo, we're back to you.
Okay. So Matt, you've identified, we've talked about the variances, you identified the proposed structure. I don't actually think I have any other questions for the witness, but certainly he's available and will stay on the meeting to ask follow-up questions.
I'm noticing that there's no dimensions from the garage to the property boundary. At least I didn't see it on the survey, and I didn't notice it on the site plan. Do we know those distances?
Yes, I do. Let me look those up real quick. We've got 3.95 feet to the side or rear property line to the south. We've got 3.17 feet as we get
I-
closer to Kemp Avenue, also to the jog in that line.
I do think this is in the bulk table as well. At the bottom of the bulk table, I think that he's indicated.
The 3.17 would be, it's the smaller of the two. Let's see. Oh, 2.25 at a point measured different from on the survey. So this is actually our closest point, right at the jog in the property line.
How about on the other side?
We've got 3.65 feet to the other side.
Thank you.
So if there's no other questions for Mr. Dubois, I'd be ready to call up my next witness.
Sounds good.
Our architect is Highland Hall Turner. He prepared the architectural plans.
Sir, if you'd give us your full name, spell your last and your address for the record, please.
Hi, Highland, you're on mute still.
Everybody hear that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. My name is Highland Hall Turner. We are located at 17 Mendham Road, Gladstone, New Jersey.
I'm going to swear you, Ms. Turner, you do swear testimony to give the board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Do you want to place Mr. Turner's credentials on the record, Mr. Sarda?
Sure. Highland, can you tell the board, put your qualifications, educational background on the record, and how long have you held a license as an architect?
Certainly. I'm a proud graduate of Cornell University with continuance at the GSD at Harvard. I have been a licensed architect in the state of New Jersey for nearly 30 years now. H. Highland Hall Turner Architects was established in New Jersey in 1990.
And have you appeared before this board and been qualified as an expert previously?
I have appeared, however, I didn't have the chance to provide testimony. We withdrew an application literally in the middle of the thing. This was for a project on Hance Road in Fairhaven, approximately about 2 years ago.
Okay. And were your credentials accepted at that time, or have they, if they weren't, then have you been accepted as an expert in other boards throughout the state?
Yes, of course. I've appeared in, I can't even count the number, probably well over 100 in not only this state, but many surrounding states in the tri-state area and even beyond that.
Thank
Was
you.
was that prior application one hands?
Yes, it was.
And are you familiar with the Fairhaven ordinances?
Yes, I am.
How did you become so familiar?
By studying the regulations carefully, as well as just having long conversations with Nick, your zoning officer, and drew the conclusions of that particular project from those conversations and the understanding of the regulations.
Have you designed any other homes in Fairhaven?
No, unfortunately, I have not. We've had many opportunities and done many homes south of you, both in Rumson and literally all the way down the coast.
I certainly don't question your credentials. I'm just asking specifically to Fairhaven because our ordinances are a little quirky. So we'll discuss anything further as we go through the plans. Any questions about Mr. Turner's qualifications?
No.
Okay, Mr. Soto.
Thank you. Actually, Highland, are you able to pull up your plans, or would you like Matt to do that for you?
You know, I'm a little skeptical given the.
Okay. All right, that's fine. Matt, do you have them available?
Yes, I do. Pulling them up now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Well, Let me just, after that introduction, give you a little historical aspect of my involvement with this project, which goes back, believe it or not, something like 12 years when John Burke acquired this piece of property. He asked me to come down and take a look at it and see what I could do with it, the existing structure. And my recommendation was that you really, to manipulate that existing structure for a sensible laid out house was nearly impossible. I went back down just recently, about 4 months ago, to take a look at the conditions of the foundation, because we originally thought, well, maybe we can take the building down and rebuild on the existing foundation. But it is a very old foundation. I wouldn't be surprised, certainly turn of the century. Cinder block has a lot of water damage and a couple of failures in the CMU block, and water penetration from below and through some of the wall surfaces. So my suggestion was, not to, put a new house on top of that foundation. And if you did, you'd want to reconstruct the entire thing. So it didn't make a lot of economic sense to provide a new home on really a deleterious foundation, one that I was not comfortable with. So this began the process of discussions of a new home for John and his family. And one of the primary aspects was, of course, the concern about both the FAR, the narrowness of the site, the setbacks, and many other issues like that, as well as the FAR, which were governed by the existing ordinances. So that's kind of what we started dealing with. The front elevation, and Matt, if you could go to the front elevation, I just want to give you a little history of this thing. And how
let me just cut you off for a moment.
Sure.
Mr. Irene, did we mark these? Was this A3?
I believe, Mr. Sarto, that we are up to A dash.
Oh, no, 4. You're right.
What was the
If that's what you were going to say.
Yes, exactly right. The aerial was A2. The survey was A3. So the floor plans and elevations prepared by Mr. Turner. 2 sheets. Is the last revision date September 24, 2021?
That is correct.
All right, so that'll be A-4. Thank you.
The concern that I had from an architectural standpoint was, of course, what we call the streetscape. The concern was we didn't want this building to appear as a fully 2-story structure. One, because of the overwhelming mass on the street. I didn't think it was appropriate. And really, we wanted to sort of fashion something that felt more like if you will, a cottage. Hence the reason for the gambrel roof pitches and the sweeping of the roofs down to the first floor to ease the building into the site. There wasn't much I could really do about the side elevations. If you want to move left a little bit, Matt, I'd appreciate it. These were devised as very linear because they had to be. There were projections that were over the lower roof case, again, following the roof lines of the gable front and rear. And you can see that as it appears on the elevation in this location. So the building was really sort of developed to, as much as we could, develop something conscientiously that fit the neighborhood, that I felt had the correct scale and the correct mass to be placed on the street. And so that's the overall concept of where the building really came to and from. I think the other aspects of this thing are the narrowness of the site, which we obviously looked at very hard. And the what generates the width is on this building is principally the second floor. And those are the bedrooms. And this is what we call a single, Matt, I'm sorry to do this to you. Could you go back to the plans on the second floor? That's basement. Yeah, in this drawing, the bedrooms on either side, we call this a single loaded or double loaded venture. In other words, the column is, the quarter is at the center of the building. And this is referenced on the front of the building in relationship to the balcony that you originally saw in that last pictorial over the front porch. The overall length and width of the main block of the building it's 32 feet wide and it's 53.3 feet long. And when I talk about that, I'm not talking about the porch. I'm talking about the actual mass of the building in that location. But when you start looking at the sizes of the rooms, by no means, to me, they're rather diminutive. On the eastern border up in this room, the room essentially is 11 foot 2 inches. And the depth of the side-to-side dimension is 13. The same on the other side. The dimension from left to right is 13 feet, and the width is only 14.4. Wouldn't normally recommend that, but we were, attempting to try to compress everything as much as possible to meet the requirements, and also, to be honest with you, to meet the requirements of the Burke family. So that's what generated the overall width of the structure in relationship to how it both related to the street and was placed on the site. We were very conscious of the fact that this building really, in my opinion, could not be manipulated much more to the point where we were cutting out sections of the building. The rear porch is an example of that. Matt, go to the first floor if you could.
Excuse me, before you do that,
Yeah.
please, the master bedroom, is there measurements for that one?
There's no measurements for that, but I can approximate that to be, it's about 15.5 feet from front to rear and approximately 18 feet left to right. But I can verify that for you.
Thanks.
Where was I? I was discussing this rear porch here off the proposed family room in an effort to sort of not add on anything more to the building, as well as to reduce the FAR requirement. A porch was inset into the main volume of the building to provide that kind of reduction in the FAR. So that is really the historical analog of how we arrived at this design. I think some of the other aspects, we tried very, very hard to manipulate this building that would work in relationship to both sides of the requirements of the owners, as well as the site. But we were left with compromising on some of those issues. And just recently, your expert planner mentioned the cantilever on the western side, which was originally located in this area, which was more of a bay for the stairwell, and we elected to remove that because of the projection into that side yard component. We've been very diligent in trying to keep this building as small as we can and still meet the requirements of the township, as well as the owner's requirements. As I said, this interesting thing about this project, it goes back many, many years for me. And I built many homes for the Burke family over the years, both in in Rumson and a variety of locations. It was my pleasure to work with John and Remy on developing this new building for them.
Highland, can I just ask you, with respect to, we are requesting the D4 variance. So what the board's really looking at there is the size of the house. Is it too large for the lot? Can that deviation be accommodated? So when you look at the width of the designed house in the front versus the width of the existing house and how you've shifted the house back further on the lot, in your opinion, do you perceive that the massing of the house from someone walking by on Willow, that it would be, would it be consistent as compared to what's out there today? Would it be consistent with other properties adjacent and on Willow?
Yes, I believe it would. I'm sure of that. Not to mention, to be honest with you, I think it's an improvement over all those things that you had mentioned in relationship to its aesthetic nature and the volume that is along the streetscape, providing sort of more of a subdued presence on that street, and certainly far better than the existing home. In my professional opinion.
Mr. Turner, do you meet the front yard setback?
I believe Matt's probably better at telling you exactly that. I believe the staircases protrude into the front yard setback from the covered porch at the front of the building. And you can sort of most identify with those. Sorry, go ahead.
If I may, I think I've discussed this with the applicant, and I think we are able to meet the front yard setback in two ways. Either two ways. One, we could move the structure back the several feet so that it meets the 30-foot requirement, or we can recess the front steps somewhat into the front porch so that the front steps would then meet the 30-foot setback requirement, thereby eliminating the variance. So we're happy to do either of those things to bring that into conformity.
Thank you, John.
Mr. Turner, I notice you have chimneys on both sides of the home. Can we put up the front elevation again?
Certainly.
With regard to the side yard setbacks, where are they measured to, the structure or the fireplaces?
They're measured from the exterior face of the wall outboard onto what would be the side property.
And how deep are the fireplaces?
Those are extended 2 feet into those areas.
And does the ordinance require that they be included in a side yard setback calculation?
No, as long as they're not 2 feet is allowable. Anything greater than that would be objected to.
So from the front of the house, I mean, it's striking. The house is beautiful. It's very, very nice. However, with the way that those two chimneys are going to be set up, it seems to me that this house is going to appear to be about 4 feet wider than it measures. Is that a fair conclusion?
Well, I think, from a bulk standpoint and a visibility standpoint, you have to consider that both of these are well in the rear of the residence. So, looking at a two-dimensional drawing, it's very difficult to visualize that. So I don't believe, it's my opinion, that they will not appear like the building is 4 foot wider than it is. These are considered architectural appurtenances, even though they have an impact and hence are allowable as an extension at 2 feet. This is my sort of opinion about the consequence of that.
Mm-hmm. What is the clear height in the basement?
We are anticipating a 9-foot slab to underside of joists. The reason we like to do that is there will be mechanical systems down there, and principally air conditioning ducts and a variety of other mechanical equipment tend to drop the ceiling. So if you start at 9 feet, you'll end up at 8 feet in relationship to allowing those HVAC ducts approximately to be constructed within the basement area to feed the perimeter walls.
Have you checked the water table yet?
We have not.
And what's the proposed finished first floor elevation?
Good question. Matt, you want to answer that?
Yeah, the first floor is set at 104.8.
What's that relative to?
To grade?
104?
It's an
104.
assumed datum.
Yeah, what's the datum, right? That's the question.
Yeah, it's an assumed datum, just the first point our surveyor set, he marked 100. But the elevation around the house is 102 in the front and 103 in the back.
What I want to know is from existing grade, what's the proposed first floor elevation? My question was sloppy. That's what I want to know, not what it is above sea level.
Right, yeah, it's about 1.8 from the rear yard and about 2.8 up from the front yard.
From a building and architectural standards point of view, the minimum that is required before the grade is associated next to the foundation is about 1 foot 8 inches. Before, in other words, to your wood plate that rests on the top of the foundation. On the other hand, if that's a concern, and we based it on the fact of trying to keep this building as low as we possibly could at 32 feet.
Well, I'm going to ask you about some of those statements with regard to trying to keep the house constrained and whatnot. Are you familiar with the R5 ordinance?
Yes, I am.
So can you help us understand how this project would fit if this property were in the R5 zone? We just sort of run around and talk about what the standards would be. And for those not familiar, R5 would generally be a 50-foot wide lot.
Right. Well, other than the bulk requirements, I think there's and I'm not sure exactly how you're being specific to that, but the R5 allowables and all these cases, and it's represented on this thing in yellow. The area, the footage of the width at 50 feet, the depth at 100, the square foot is 7,000. But I don't want to bore you with reading this chart to you. So I think the point of the question might be, does this building specifically violate some of these requirements? Yes, of course, particularly the side yard setback on the eastern property of this property.
Mr. Turner, my question was the opposite.
All right.
I want to know where you conform to the R5. And if we then find that you don't conform, I'd like to explore that a little bit, but I'm specifically interested in how the requirements would be different if you were in a zone that was consistent with the width of your lot.
So Highland, I believe that Mr. Leader, Chairman Leader's question is, well, let's start with the side yard setbacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
The total side yard setback is 16 as a requirement. And I believe that we would comply with that standard if it were in the R5 zone, which has a 50-foot width. Is that correct, Highland?
Yes, that would be correct.
And finish that up. So what's the minimum one side? I see that it's 7. What is the one side that you are proposing?
The eastern side of the residence is 6 foot 7 inches.
Right. So
You would not comply with
6.7, so 6 foot 8 inches.
No, I'm sorry. Thank you. 6'8". So we would not comply with this covenant.
Okay, so you would not comply with the 7 feet, you'd be short, but only slightly. You would comply with regard to the combined because your proposal is for a greater total combined than 16, correct?
Exactly.
With regard to the front yard, you're being held to 30. Would you comply if 25 was applied to this project?
Yes. Yes, we would. I think the distance from the property line at the front face of the building is 31 feet. And it would certainly comply in that regard.
Okay. How about lot coverage, habitable floor area, et cetera, everything to the right?
Habitable floor area, we're over on that.
Oh, no, we're at 0.3. What's permitted is 0.4, so it would comply. Right, Island?
Oh, exactly. Thank you.
But that's the ratio, but on the cap, it would violate.
That's correct.
Okay, what about a calculation of lot coverage? I don't want to skip over numbers. This is particularly important.
Yeah, this comes from the site plan, which is 9,243 square feet.
My guess is, Mr. Sardo, since you're not asking for a variance, you comply with the 40% lot coverage, notwithstanding the size of the barn/garage. You would have the additional 10% here, but you don't need it because you'd comply with the tighter restriction in the R10A, right?
Correct.
Okay. What about building coverage?
It would help. I have access to the zone table in front of me.
You're showing it.
Oh, you do? Yeah.
Yes, it's up on the screen, but those numbers are identical and we comply.
Right.
Right.
And then with regard to the height, you're at 32, correct?
Yes, correct. We are in compliance.
Okay. So, Mr. Turner, you talked a lot about designing the house in a way that was consistent with the size of the lot. The first thing I would look to is the R5 zone.
The height would not comply with the R5 zone because the height for the R5 zone is 30, not 32.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Al, I realized that. If I didn't say it, I meant to. They comply with the R10A zone at 32, but they would not comply with the R5 zone at 30.
Correct.
So, Mr. Turner, you testified that you are working very hard to create a home that conformed to the size of the lot and fit in. And what I wanted to understand is when you look at the R5 zone, which is the most comparable to your lot, I'm interested in understanding why you were unable to comply with the height requirement. And obviously you had a problem with regard to the cap relative to the size of the structure.
Correct. Many times this is a function. Peaks of roofs are adjusted as much as they can be in relationship to the overall scale of the building and to try to keep it as low as we could. It's not that we couldn't have adjusted that from 32 feet to 30, but the gambrel, it gets incredibly shallow at that thing to preserve the nature of the scale of this building. We can certainly attempt to achieve that by doing probably a couple of things. One is lowering the building by a few inches. In other words, first floor to grade. I think we can accomplish that by certainly a few inches anyway, maybe 6 to 8 inches. And then re-slope the roof to meet the 30-foot requirement.
Well, and you talked a lot about the second floor and the difficulty with the bedrooms, but obviously we have a lot of homes in town that are built to 2,200 and they're built to these standards. Is there something unique to this lot or this project that made that more difficult? Or were you kind of working within the R10A requirements and trying not to exceed those more than you did?
Yeah, I think that was certainly a concern, as well as the room sizes for the Burke family. So these things were discussed at length with the Burkes in relationship to relative size of particularly each of the bedrooms. And as I said, I think they're rather diminutive in relationship to overall size for each of the bedrooms.
Okay.
Mr. Turner, if you were to remove 224 square feet from the structure to conform to the floor area ratio of 0.28, how would that impact your design?
Well, we'd first have to look at basically carving additional space out of the principally the first floor. So the first notion is to carve out a little bit more of the porch in the back. And then the only other thing that I could suggest without further consideration would be the overall width of the house, which could be narrowed, I think, by a foot on each side. I'm not sure that would remove the 204 square feet because 200 that's a fairly good sized chunk of real estate. But I could certainly get close by two of those alternatives.
I can appreciate the narrowness of this lot relative to the R10. And I think trying to conform to the setbacks in the R10A would be challenging. I'm with you on that, but to knock down the structure, we often say you've kind of removed the hardship, right?
Correct.
I'm struggling to get to why we can't bring in a house at 2588 square feet and conform on the floor area ratio.
Yeah, and I think the adjustments to this building from an architectural standpoint would have to come in its overall width. In other words, removing as much as possible by bringing in both sides of the structure by probably at least a foot and a half. The issue on that is the bedrooms upstairs become remarkably tight. And you'd left to be sort of compromising some of that left to right dimension in those bedrooms by literally sort of trying to add on a little bit more to the rear of the residence.
So I can understand that the house would have to get probably skinnier and longer, but yeah, it seems to me like you do have some rear yard to work with.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know if any of the rest of the board feels the same, but when you knock down a house and have a blank slate to work with, I struggle to find the justification for D-variance.
One thing that concerns me, Mr. Ryan, is that, the question becomes whether this particular lot can accommodate the house that's being proposed. And I can't really justify knocking the house down, keeping this oversized garage, which is not used to park any cars, having two separate driveways that go into, or I guess the cars are going to be parked in the driveways as opposed to being parked in the garage. So to me, the whole lot seems like an R5 lot. I know that the proposal states that the lot is 9,243 square feet, but to me that flag driveway off of Kemp is really dead space. So we're really talking about a lot that's much more like an R5. It's not even like a 10A. So I think Mr. Lader's exercise in going through the R5 requirements show that an R5 type size of 2,200 square feet would really be accommodated much better on this particular lot. Perhaps if the applicant had come in with a plan to move the garage, open up some of that back space, but I can't get away from feeling that this structure and then the garage that's there already are just going to loom over those poor people on the corner in a way that really isn't what we encourage in Fairhaven. And also the fact that there are two separate driveways on what is in essence a 50-foot wide lot, serving really no apparent purpose.
If I may, I just briefly respond to some of your comments, and because I think the exercise of comparing this to across the street to R5 is a good one. And in doing so, we looked at the side yard setbacks. While we didn't meet the single side yard setback, it did meet the combined. So then we're looking at the width of the house being more or less comparable with what's allowable in the R5. However, we got to recognize that we are on the other side of the street. Our lot is much bigger, almost twice as big as what's allowed in R5. And that what the D4 variance really is regulating is the size of the house. So if we're okay with the width and how it appears from Willow Street, and I'm not, when I say we're okay, generally, if we're in compliance with the width requirements, and then really we're looking at, well, what's the impact? It's a visual one of the mass of the house and who's impacted. It's really your neighbor only to the left and the right. And when we look at lot 8, that house, from what we can tell and from the tax records, is bigger and has a more severe D4 variance than we do. Of course, the tax records are not definitive and not, certainly they're informative, but I don't think anyone would be paying taxes on square footage that's significantly higher than what they actually are. But my point being that if we're looking at this from the street and that the width is more or less in line with what's R5, it really comes down to the depth of the property and the impact on the neighbors to the left and the right.
Excuse me, the width is 50 feet in a zone that requires 100, and yet you are building a house that's more designed for a lot that's 100 feet wide. I mean, this house would be beautiful.
That's not my, no, I think the point I'm trying to make is in the R5 zone across the street, the lots are required to be 50 feet wide. You're allowed to have a house that's 33 feet wide.
You're allowed
right?
to have a house that's 2,200 feet large, right?
Right, and that's, now I'm trying to come full circle on that. The width really is comparable with what's allowable across the street. But recognizing that we're on the other side of the street, we have a much larger lot than R5.
In what way? You don't have a wider lot than R5.
No, it's twice the depth though.
What we're talking about is the view from the street and the fact that a lot of your depth is taken up by a fairly worthless entry off of Kemp and a 710-foot structure that's serving, I guess, storage. I mean,
Unless, and I don't, if you're coming down Kemp, frankly, I don't know that you don't have to almost investigate to figure out that garage was attached to this principal residence.
I looked for it, I couldn't see it. So it really concerned me that it's being used to bump up the square footage of the lot because I don't.
No, the lot square footage is what it is. That's,
It's a very strange shape. The flag entry is not in any way supportive of a lot that can handle this size structure.
Mr. Dubois, can we put up the tax map again? I think you had it on your site plan.
Yes, I did.
Mr. Shardo, you mentioned a lot 8 and something that was oversized.
Correct.
I wasn't sure exactly what you were talking about. Could you
Sure. I will indulge you. So that is the house directly to the east of us, which, yeah, in this orientation is right there. That lot is slightly smaller than ours. I believe that the floor area ratio for that lot would be more around a 3.32. And that's the point I was making. Now, I don't have the. Go ahead.
Where does that come from?
So Monmouth County Mod 4 property tax records, where you can get the, the dimensions can be ascertained from the, the length and width of the lot. And then on the tax card, it will tell you square footage of the residence.
Okay, so that tax card shows that house is how big exactly?
Bear with me.
It's showing 2664 of habitable.
Okay, so I just want to point out that, the argument that, from the front, it's going to look nice. And with regard to the size, it really only matters to the two properties adjacent. I mean, the problem with that argument is that we hear about it in a future application. Well, this house was approved at 2,800, and so everything's relative to everything else. And I think that's really the spirit of the balancing test and the negative impact of granting a variance. And I think that you need to overwhelm that with regard to the positive criteria. But I really want to get to the argument that this lot is unusually large. The lots immediately to the east of this are equally deep. I presume they're equally wide, and unless you're going to tell me that otherwise, I'm going to conclude same. The lot above that is almost twice the size. The lot 4 that's immediately to the south is probably twice the size. The one that you sort of work around is clearly a bit smaller. And then as you look across the street at the other R5 stuff, there's some shorter lots immediately across from you, and they don't look to be 150 in comparison, but the ones as you move down Willow certainly are. I don't know if there's anything unusual about an R5 that's 150 feet deep. Not that you don't have the math, I get it, but it's certainly not exceptionally large based on, the other lots in this area or other R5 zones. It's just a statement. You don't have to respond to it. I'm really reacting.
I appreciate the feedback. It helps shape our, where we go here.
Mr. Sardo, just so I don't lose sight of it, what actually is the proposed habitable floor area ratio at this time? On the
We're at
revised
2806.
2806, where 28 is permitted?
The ratio is 0.30.
Sorry. Did you ask for the ratio or the amount of square feet?
Habitable floor area ratio, the D.
Our ratio is 0.30 or thereabouts 0.3, I believe.
Okay.
And what's the total square footage? That's the 2806?
Correct.
And Mr. Turner, did that number change recently? Was the house reduced in size by some change?
Ever so slightly by removing the bay that was protruding from the stairwell.
Okay. Did we get through the entirety of Mr. Turner's testimony? I know we got kind of sidetracked and started talking. I want to make sure that we got everything on the record.
Yes, he basically presented his narrative about the plans. Perhaps there was some follow-up questions in response to the planner's review letter. That if, I guess I would ask Ms. Gable if she has any questions based on the testimony so far, if she has questions that haven't been addressed.
Yes, I do have a couple questions. But I also want to circle back to what the chairman had asked me to look up about the garage area. I found the location of the requirement in the ordinance. It's located under section 30-7.8, accessory buildings and structures, specifically under F, about the ground floor area of all accessory buildings may not exceed the following percentages of ground floor of the principal building. And in the R10A zone, which we are in, you're not supposed to exceed 40% of the principal structure. But I also was just wanted to point out that the garage is an existing structure.
Yeah, but the house isn't.
Right, and yes,
So does it meet the 40%?
I don't know. Looking based upon what's been submitted on the plot plan, I would say that it's likely bigger. But I don't have those exact calculations.
So we can ask somebody to look at it. Ms. Gable, does it relate to the first floor habitable space or the first floor of the structure? Because there's multiple porches on this home.
I think it relates to the overall ground floor coverage area. So it would include the porch, the covered porch in the back, the overall footprint of the single family home.
Okay, and what's the standard in the R5 zone?
It's same, 40%.
Okay. Mr. Sardo, if you could help us understand whether or not you comply, because any action by the board tonight in favor of the proposal would need to include any variance that's triggered by that calculation.
Let me come off mute. So if I like to wear an engineering hat sometimes, but since my engineer's here, he can wear it. Matt, did you follow the regulations that Ms. Gable laid out? And
Yes, I'm just going
you
to
have that?
double check the first floor area, but based on the zone table, taking 710 away from the building coverage, we have 41% ratio of garage to building, first floor.
So we'd exceed the 40% that applies either in R5 or in R10A. And there's obviously an existing structure that is the garage, but there's a new structure that is the house. So I would think, Mr. Sardo, that if that's the case, then the proposal is to have a variance with regard to that ordinance as well.
Understood. And Matt, I guess Matt's saying we violated by 1%.
Right.
Unfortunately. Yes, so that would trigger relief from that requirement.
Is that based upon the architectural drawing footprint that was just submitted a week and a half ago?
It is.
Okay, thank you. So I had that to follow up on. Are there any other questions about that? Okay.
Elena,
Sure.
I have a question about the front yard, I guess. This is not a corner lot,
Correct.
but it fronts on two different streets
Correct.
because of the flag.
Correct.
And we've got driveway coverage on both of those, plus the walkway to the front door. The walkway to the front door is proposed to be removed and rebuilt. How would that impact the 25% of the front yard coverage for that coverage if you've got the driveway on the other side that's, I don't know if that's considered front yard or not. I don't know if that would be considered in the percentage of the front yard that's covered by driveway and front walk.
Yeah, so this lot is definitely unusual for Fairhaven. Generally, you know, we've seen corner lots come before the zoning board, but this isn't a corner lot. But Al, I think you are correct that I think that it should be treated as two front yards since they both have frontage on a right of way.
Yep.
But you know, we kind of get into a funky situation where, you know, it's the accessory structure that fronts on the street.
My first concern about it was the percentage of the front yard that's covered by driveway and front walk. If both driveways, which I believe they're proposing, both are to exist as they are, and the front walk were to exist as they are, that it would all be existing, and that's not a change. They are proposing to move the front walk. So when they do that, do they get into that? Yeah, does that affect that 25% of the front yard coverage issue? And how would you calculate that with these two separate areas that front on streets, although it's not a corner lot? How would you, and how would you calculate the coverage?
So Al, I think that the two front yards are considered separately. And I think that each of the front yards needs to comply. I don't think that you average the two or put them together. And so just to make sure I cover my point, and I'm not sure that I'm getting yours, I think there's a pre-existing violation with regard to the existing barn garage and the driveway, because they're clearly exceeding the 25, but it's pre-existing and nothing's proposing to change.
Okay.
With regard to the Willow frontage, they should independently comply with that. And I don't know whether or not they do or whether anybody's considered it, but I think that is independent of the issue on Kemp.
Okay. Yeah, that was my question, since, like I said, it's not a corner lot, but it does have two frontages on different roads there.
Lots with frontage on Porch may have a front designated.
Let's do this. Let's set that to the side. Elena, you can take a look at that,
Sure.
offline as we're moving forward. You wanted to go through other issues or questions or clarifications?
Yes, I would like to go through just my report real quickly. I've been trying to keep up with as things have been addressed throughout the hearing. But the one thing I just wanted to ask from the completeness review of my application is whether or not the freehold soil conservation district permit is going to be needed.
With the current design, we're only disturbing 4,800 square feet. So
Okay.
we wouldn't be required to have one, but we can apply for an exemption and deliver that to the board.
Yeah, any relief is going to be conditioned upon either freehold soil approval or a letter of exemption.
Okay, great. And then I guess did we discuss the attic access during the architectural review?
No.
Could we get some testimony about the attic access then, please?
Yes, absolutely. The attic access was inadvertently not shown on the second floor plan, but it will be located as a pull-down stair in the hallway of the second floor.
Okay, great. And then to kind of touch on some of the variances that are required, do either of you happen to know what the prevailing setback is for the street in this neighborhood along from the adjacent properties?
Don't have that information right now.
Okay, because I'm just curious to know whether if the homes along either side, if they conform to the 30-foot setback or if they all also encroach. So I noticed that on the survey and the plot plan, it doesn't give the building footprints of the adjacent dwellings. And while I see that the existing home is extremely deficient for the front yard setback, I just wonder whether the adjacent dwellings are also deficient in their setback. And whether having this home conform to the 30 feet or push it back further, if it's going to look out of character with the neighborhood.
Right. And I think maybe it's helpful to pull back the air. Right. Thank you. And you'll see that's the proposed roof line there for our site. So, but pushing it back further, I guess, I've heard it referred to looking like a mouthful of jagged teeth when they're out of alignment, but it does appear that those other ones are set back up closer into the front yard than ours.
Right. And then it looks like, two houses down to the left, it looks like that house is in line with the 30-foot. And then the corner lot is also appears to be in line with the 30-foot setback. Okay, no, I was just curious because the existing home is, so much closer to the street that if anything, the existing dwelling is probably out of line with the character of the neighborhood. Okay, thank you. And so let me just get back to my report. in that the overhang on the second floor is now removed from the architectural plans?
Yes.
Okay. How does that impact the one and combined side yard setback?
We hadn't calculated that as part of those, so there's no change.
Okay. And then can you provide some testimony regarding the materials and colors proposed for the exterior of the dwelling?
Certainly, absolutely. The building will be, the sidewalls or the exterior finishes will be a white cedar in an effort to make this tarnish to that sort of gray that we see along the ocean occasionally. And that comprises most of the vertical surfaces of the building. The roof will be of asphalt shingle. The colors of this, obviously, we've taken under account the tarnishing of the white cedar, and that would be preferable to be a natural tarnish. So it would resolve itself into a light gray eventually. The roof lines, particularly over the porches that you see on the front of the building, will be a standing seam copper. The trim will be painted white.
Are there any landscaping proposed along the foundation of the dwelling, or
I'm sure that could be accommodated, but it's a little out of my bailiwick.
okay.
So a landscape architect would probably be most appropriate.
The applicants here, if you'd like, I think the answer is, of course, they plan on putting some plantings. They're not on this plan. Certainly if plantings were requested or desired in any particular area, whether that be by the neighbor or proposed by the board, certainly happy to entertain that.
Are any trees proposed to be removed as a result of the improvements?
Yeah, there is a tree in the rear yard that would require removal, and I think that we'd require that permit from the governing body or via the application. The arborist would have to review that.
Okay. Is the existing playset in the rear yard going to remain or be removed? It's shown on the survey and the plot plan.
I'm sorry, what, can you repeat that question? I
Sure.
apologize.
Is the existing playset in the rear yard proposed to remain?
Yes.
I know it's not really a structure. It's just, indicated on the survey, and there wasn't a note about either. I just was wondering. Okay.
For the time being, while the kids use it, I think they'd like to keep it there.
Sure, not a problem. And so the existing rear patio is all proposed to be removed, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. Are there any changes proposed for utility connections at this point? Are you, this is something that I've been including in my report, even though I'm obviously not an engineer. The borough's ordinance does require that utility connections be installed underground. And I was just wondering if the applicant has given any consideration to that requirement.
We're planning on reusing the utilities where we can, and I'm sure we can accommodate placing anything that's currently above ground, below ground.
Okay. And then is there any stormwater management being proposed at the property as a result of the improvements?
We weren't planning on any since we're actually decreasing the overall impervious surface on the site.
Okay, I believe that's all my comments in my report. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, Mr. Leader, I'd just like to come back to the idea of, we've heard the comments of, from some of the board members about the size and the we've talked about the comparison to the zone across the street. I just like to, I guess, either poll the board or ask if I could, just a follow-up question. Are we talking, what the main concerns being necessarily the width and the appearance, or compliance with the overall size? I think they are interrelated, and I'm just trying to gather or clarify those comments, at least for myself and for the applicant.
Mr. Sardo, why don't we do this? Why don't we go to the public if you're done with your testimony? And why don't we gather those comments, and then, the board and you can have a dialogue at that point, but once we've created the entire record.
Thank you. That's a good recommendation.
Okay. Any board members have any questions before we go to the public? Okay. Are there any members of the public who have any comments or questions with regard to this application? Please use the raise your hand feature and we'll bring you forward, and we'll hear you now.
I'm going to bring forward Adam Bogan, but we need to stop the share screen. Thanks.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Mr. Bogan, Mr. Irene is going to ask you your address, and he's going to swear you in.
Sure.
So if you give us your full name, spell your last, and your address for the record, please.
It's Adam Bogan, Bogan, 119 Willow Street.
Okay, can you give us a video? Can we see you? Hello?
Yeah, let's see.
There you go. I'm gonna swear you in. If you raise your right hand, you do swear your testimony you give the board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I've seen the plans. I think their house would be an amazing addition to the town. It looks beautiful. I live on the street, and I think it fits with the overall character of the street very nicely. And it's just going to be a spectacular addition to the town overall.
Any questions? Any questions, Mr. Sardo? Any cross?
No, thank you, Adam. Appreciate your comments. No questions.
Okay.
I'm going to
Anyone
bring
else?
in, Mr. Newsome, Doug Newsome. I'm going to bring him forward.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, before we swear in Mr. Newsome, there's something that I wanted to kind of button up with Mr. Sardo, and this would probably be a good time to do it. I should indicate for the record that Mr. Sardo submitted a correspondence with a neighboring property owner. And Mr. Sardo, I'm going to ask you about this in a minute, which, as I understand it, is the adjacent property to the south, which I'm going to assume is Mr. Newsome.
That's me.
Okay, we'll get to you in 1 minute, Mr. Newsome.
All right.
Wherein Mr. Sardo inquired if Mr. Newsome would be interested in selling any of his property, because apparently of all the adjacent properties to this site, that property is the only one that would have any land to give. Mr. Newsome indicated in his response that he was not interested in selling any property. He also added some comments to that response, which is the reason I directed Sandy not to distribute it to the board members, but to place it in the file. So I do want to indicate for the record that Mr. Newsome did respond to that inquiry from Mr. Sardo and indicate that he was not interested in selling any property. As for his comments, now that we have Mr. Newsome here, we can swear him in and he can give those comments directly to the board, and whatever was written on that letter, in addition to, no, I don't want to sell any of my property, but otherwise have constituted hearsay. But before we go to Mr. Newsome, Mr. Sardo, maybe you can help me out, because it looked like the letter that you sent to Mr. Newsome referred to his property as lot 4. But if I'm looking at the plot plan prepared by Mr. Dubois, it looks like, assuming I'm looking at the correct property, that what would be Mr. Newsom's property adjacent to the garage there on the south is referred to as lot 5. Is it just an error, or is there some confusion? And if so, do we know what happened to lot 5? Because looking at the tax map, I can't seem to find it, although it's very small.
I think that is just an error on their survey.
Okay, so we're assuming that it is lot 4, and we can ask Mr. Newsom in a minute. I can't see a lot 5. The other
I
question
believe
I
there are
had.
2 lots that were combined and now appear as 4. I
Okay.
don't know whether I took it from a deed or the tax records, but that, I agree, your observation is correct, but yes, it's, I'm indicating 21 Kemp and Mr. Newsom's property.
Okay, and the other question I had is the letter that you sent over to Mr. Newsom indicates that the subject property, Mr. Burke's property, is lots 7 and 7.01. Do we know what the reference to the 7.01 pertains to?
There's a very tiny sliver of property at the rear that is, maybe 2 feet by 50 feet, something like that. And our deed reflects that we own both 7 and 7.01, and our notice reflects that as well.
Well, is that sliver reflected on the plot plan as part of the subject property? Maybe
Our
Mr.
survey found that to be an area of questionable title. While the deed does mention they own 7.01, the meets and bounds of their property does not include that sliver. So we were cautious and only included the area of 7.
Right, so the records we have, including the deed, the tax records, indicate that 7 and 7.01 are the client's property. We've noticed for that. But for bulk standards, and as Matt has represented, he did not include that area in his calculation out of abundance of caution. Although I imagine it would be incrementally only a very small amount of area.
Okay, and just to put a little bow on that, do you have the area of that sliver, what we're going to call 7.01, Mr. Dubois, just so the board's aware of what kind of space we're talking about?
I've got the other cat up. I'll find it in just a second.
Is that the 2 feet by 51.9 feet that runs adjacent to the
Correct.
southern property line? Is that what it is?
That would add 77 square feet to the property.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sardo. So Mr. Newsom,
Yes,
could you give us your full name, spell your last, your address for the record?
my full name is James Douglas Newsom, 21 Kemp Avenue.
Okay, and I'm going to swear you in, sir. If you'd raise your right hand, you do swear your testimony to give the board will be truth, all truth, and nothing but truth?
I swear to I swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Your comments, sir?
Yeah, I could say a couple things. I'd say I am directly south of John and Remy's property. I think I've seen the plans. I think it's in line with the neighborhood. I think it's a big improvement to the existing structure. We are that garage is right next to our driveway. And it kind of looks like it was, it kind of looks like if you're driving down Kemp, it almost looks like it's our driveway, our garage. But if you're driving down Kemp, you would never notice it. You don't really, it's really not, it looks fine. And it's sort of an interesting actual structure. I think the new house will be, it'll be a giant improvement from the old house. It'll be a giant improvement. It'll make all the neighbors' houses look, it's an improvement into the neighborhood. And I'm looking forward to it. And no, we didn't want to sell the property or the line. It doesn't, we like our property, so.
Any cross, Mr. Sardo?
No, the only question I had was about the the certification that we submitted, but he's answered that. And well, rather, I guess, aside from, you've mentioned that you have no problem with the garage, that you barely notice it. Other than that, is there any plantings in between your property to screen it? Have you ever had a problem with it? The cars parking in the driveway, are they?
John parks one car in the driveway, and he parks his car in that driveway, and his wife parks her car in the other driveway. Except for when when their kids are playing in the driveway, they'll shoot baskets and stuff. But we don't, there's no issue. I mean, frankly, all the houses across the street, they all park there. Nobody seems to park their cars in the garages. They're all in the driveway for whatever reason. But John, also, you guys asked the question about the lot number 4 and 5. Our property used to be two lots. And at some point, I mean, years ago, it was combined. And I mean, many, many years ago. And I guess that's why you have the weird number situation. It was combined maybe a couple decades ago.
Thank you.
Actually, more than a couple decades, probably more than 30 years ago, it was combined.
And I think you've already hit this point, but the proposed home would be, further, it'd be closer to your lot relative to the existing structure. You don't have a problem with that it's obstructing your view or use and enjoyment of your property?
No, it's not that material. I mean, it won't be this. No, it's not going to be material.
Thank you. That was the only questions I had.
Sure.
Thanks, Mr. Newsom.
Okay, you're welcome.
Any other members of the public have any questions or comments with regard to the application? Okay, let the record reflect none. Mr. Sardo, so we have 5 variances as I've calculated. We've got a single side yard, we've got the combined side yard, we've got the floor area ratio variance, we've got the front yard setback variance, and then we have the size of the garage relative to the first floor footprint. Are any of your arguments tied to the C1 criteria rather with regard to hardship?
Well, yeah, the existing, well, wait, let's come back to the existing garage. We have a variance for that one, correct? That's
No, all of that's pre-existing nonconformities. A lot of irregularities and whatnot. I've skipped them all. They're all pre-existing nonconformities. The garage is pre-existing. However, you're creating the variance by having a home that is is it larger, smaller? It's
oddly, it brings it more into conformity with the standard as proposed, but yes, the 41% versus the 40%, that's what we're talking about, right?
right.
Correct. The narrowness of the lot certainly is a hardship in that to conform, we would have to, with the combined side yard setbacks, the house would have to be 25 feet wide, which is a hardship as to respect to those side yard setbacks. I believe it earlier in the testimony, we stipulated that we'd agreed to move the house back out of the front yard. So I guess perhaps we could say we're down to the 4 instead of 5. Again, if that was the board's preference, if the board would prefer that it was set back to where it is proposed, then certainly we would leave it there.
Okay, so so you've got C2 variances beyond that. Can you run us through the positive and negative?
Sure. So for the C variances on the positive, you got to look at the purposes of the MLUL under the flexible criteria. And we advanced several of those criteria. And I did have them jotted down. Under subsection 2 of MLUL, Section A, to encourage appropriate use and development of all lands in the state that will promote public health, safety, and morals and general welfare. Section C, adequate light, air, and open space. Section D, it doesn't conflict with the development and general welfare in the neighboring municipalities, the county, or the state as a whole. Section E, it promotes establishment of appropriate population densities and concentrations that contribute to the well-being of persons, neighborhoods, and communities. Section G, sufficient space and appropriate locations for variety uses, in this case, particularly residential. Section I, promotes a desirable visual environment through creative design techniques. And Section M, no, strike that. Section M, I don't think applies. So that's what we would rely on as to the positive here. And then as
Mr. Sarr, let me ask you, I know I'm kind of messing around a little bit, but it seems to me that, this is a little tough. Is there anything specifically tied to these variances that tie into those positive criteria? I mean, we've all heard that list many times, and I think what you're faced with here. You've got a lot that is more consistent with the R5 standards than the R10A. And you're starting from scratch. Is there anything specifically with regard to building in excess of 600 square feet over and triggering, you really don't even meet the R5 side yard setback.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to discuss. So but presume for a moment we applied R5 and we were able to shave off I think there was something around 4 inches in side yard setback to comply with the single side yard. But presume for a moment we could comply with single and combined side yards for the R5, then the question about the width of the house has kind of now been addressed. So then the questions about floor area, and I think you just stated a number. What was the number that you just stated? As far as floor area being over the standards.
So you've got a 2,200 square foot cap in the R5. You really, I don't know what everybody else thinks, but it really would be pretty ridiculous for the board to grant a variance from the R5 standard to start over again. But you've made it. I think Mr. Ryan said it correctly. You've got a hardship with regard to the width of the lot. You've got a reasonable board here. I know it doesn't always feel that way, but you do. And so we see that's all clear. And even with regard to the front yard setback, you've also proven through the evidence that you've already put on that your front yard, as you proposed it, is not inconsistent with the neighboring homes. And in fact, pushing it back further, isn't necessarily an improvement to the overall plan. And so, you've got arguments with regard to that. But
right.
In Fairhaven, on an R5 lot, you're allowed to build 2,200 square feet. In addition to not doing that, you have what might be the largest garage anywhere in the neighborhood. That's a pre-existing structure with 2 levels that is significant in size. And you're proposing to build 600 square feet over. And so I'm really interested in understanding how that argument can be made under the C2 standard, and with regard to the D variance, how you can meet that criteria as well.
Well, with the D variance, I then come back to, again, assuming the width is not, recognizing there's de minimis variance from the R5 standards as existing and proposed. Then the question is, well, if the width of the home is okay, and we're looking then at the area of the home, can the lot accommodate the area of the home? If we're talking about a 2,200 square foot cap, the cap then is a C variance, not a D4 variance, right? That's correct, right?
Yes.
Right. So then the question is, okay, from the streetscape, if front, side to side, it looks okay placed on the lot, then what are we regulating if we make the house shorter or longer and add more area in the back, right? It's the view shed from Willow is not really changing. So who's impacted? Your neighbors left and right and behind. And also, I guess, pertinent is what can you see from Kemp? Can you see the house from Kemp? And I would say, no, you can't. The lot on the corner has substantial plantings there. Like if you look from that perspective, you really can't see through to this lot. And then, the question really becomes, is it really so offensive to put more volume in the rear yard when the only people that are going to see it are your neighbors who either have supported this or haven't appeared. I know perhaps that's not the legal justification, but practically speaking, that's how I'm viewing this. And that's why I'm kind of struggling to see if we're okay with the width and how it looks from Willow, then we're addressing the, can the lot accommodate the additional size in the rear of the yard? And I think we're not encroaching into the rear yard setback. There's plenty of room back there. You've heard from the neighbor in the back that he thinks it would be a de minimis impact. And in my mind, then I'm trying to reconcile, what would the board be looking for? Should we just, I guess in this instance, to make it variance free, if we're applying R5, should we come all the way down to 2,200 square feet just for the sake of complying? Or is the actual proposal, can it be reconciled that it really is no impact on the standards and that the deviation can be granted? That's how I view this.
What's unique about it? I get everything you just said, and it seems to apply to every R5 lot in town that's an interior lot. I can't see the back of it. Why is the standard 2,200? I'm not going to argue policy with you, but if the argument is it works here, is it just that you can't see it from the street? Or that you're in the R10A, so you kind of have this opening?
Well, our lot's twice the size of an R5 lot. We can't ignore that.
It's twice the size of the R5 minimum.
Correct. And that's my point, that we can't ignore that fact. And I know, we're transitioning between applying R5 and R10A. But I certainly would say if we had this standard 5,000 square foot lot in the R5 zone, you wouldn't expect to see me recommending to the client that we come to the board with that application, because yes, it would be extremely intense to be that much over.
Okay. Any other board members have any questions for Mr. Sardo or want to have a further dialogue before we deliberate? Mr. Sardo, I assume you're done with presenting testimony?
Can you just give me 1 second to confirm my client?
Sure.
Thank you.
Elena, you were looking at something. We left you with something to look at.
You did leave me with something to look at, and I just dawned on me that, oh yeah, the driveway coverage. So the driveway coverage standard is that in a single family zone district or on a lot with a single family dwelling, an entry driveway or walkway may cross any yard area, but not more than 25% of the front yard area shall be used as a driveway or for off-street parking. So based upon that standard, the driveway the realignment of the existing driveway off of Willow Street, I'm looking at the plan. It does not appear to me that that driveway width is more than 25% of the front yard area, but perhaps Mr. Dubois can confirm that.
That's correct. It's a 10-foot wide driveway, and I believe we had 50 feet of frontage.
It's 1/5, 20%, right?
That's correct.
But then the frontage along Kemp Avenue, it's, it's mostly paved. So that would be an existing non-conforming condition.
That would, and I can also get you the exact size. At the property line, the driveway is 22 feet wide out of the 27.25.
Okay, Mr. Sardo, the question was whether or not you had anything further to present to the board.
No, I have nothing further other than we're asking the board to consider this and grant the application based on all the testimony you've heard. Again, I think looking at the community surrounding neighborhood, particularly on our side of the street, we think that this does fit in and is reconcilable and will result in a home that hopefully everyone would think looked nice, but also would feel was right sized and appropriate and not out of place or character. So we're asking for the board to vote affirmatively on this application.
Thank you, Mr. Sardo. Discussion. Who haven't we heard from? Mr. Ridgway?
Appreciate the testimony, appreciate the conversations. I get the restrictions on the lot width and fitting this well-designed home into this lot. I guess I'm at the moment, I always stumble over the demolition of a house on a property, even the foundation of this particular property. And knowing that there are requirements that when a house is being demolished and being proposed to be redesigned, I always struggle with, well, we have specs to follow. And I don't know if I've really heard enough justification particularly as it relates to the size, enough justification really. That's all I have, Todd.
Thanks, Mr. Ridgway. How about Dr. Laufer?
I think the house as designed is a beautiful structure. I think the architect should be complimented in terms of designing this. I do recognize the constraints due to the narrowness of the lot. I don't think that the visual mass of the house is out of character with the other houses in the neighborhood. And I think that the depth of the lot can tolerate the additional square footage that's being asked for. If we're not using the same foundation, I would like to see the front yard setback move back to conform. I think it's only a couple of feet. I don't think it'll change anything, but I think it will get rid of one additional variance needed. Overall, I don't think that the plan is unreasonable, and I'm inclined to support it.
Thank you. Mr. Leibman, you're off mute.
I am. I think I concur with Dr. Laufer. It is a tough lot and there's some dead space here. I had the same concerns as Mr. Ridgway in, the fact that we're starting from scratch here, but I think we heard testimony from Mr. Turner that, working with the existing structure, particularly the aged foundation would be difficult and expensive. And so, I appreciate that. I do, it's obviously narrow. And, I had a little bit of concern, especially about going over the ratio. But there's not much room to work with here. And, the structures, I think we heard testimony 32 feet wide. It's not very wide at all. The rooms are of relatively modest size. Seems to be consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. And I think the design is very impressive, frankly. I mean, I really do like the look of it for what that's worth. So, I mean, ultimately, I think I am inclined to support, although admittedly it is kind of a tough decision.
Who's next?
I'll just reinforce what I said earlier. And I think actually I mentioned 224 square feet. I think it's down to 218 square feet now. So basically you're asking for 109 square feet to be removed from the first and second floor, a little more than a 10 by 10 area. I'm pretty confident that Mr. Turner could find that. I just struggle with giving a D variance to a tear down.
Ms. Quigley?
Yes, I think I would look at it differently if it was a little smaller, the house, so that we didn't need the D variance. And also just in terms of the negative factors that have to be overcome. If they had come in with a plan to tear down that garage, I know that it doesn't contribute to the habitable floor area ratio, but nonetheless, I think the purposes of the MLUL are better served with a yard that's a yard. And if it's not suiting any purpose, what is keeping me from getting there with this application is the combined effect of the D variance size of the house and the garage remaining on that back piece of the property. It just seems to me to be a case where the negative criteria are not met in a way that could support the granting of the D variance. So I would not be in favor of this application.
Can I just ask about, because I kind of thought about that too. Like getting rid of the garage, and would that maybe serve a better purpose? But I guess my issue with that, just to put it out there, was like the idea of kind of destruction of property where it's not really warranted and there is some kind of historic value. I mean, I thought the history was quite interesting. And it does seem to serve a purpose for storage and so on, and doesn't seem to be habitable. So I was kind of struggling with that too and thinking about it too. I just thought I'd put that out there.
I think
storage space is really hard to come by. And I think that taking away a structure like that garage is really kind of counterproductive to what the family would use it for. It's great having that additional storage. It's great having some place to put bicycles. It's great having that a little additional space. So I would like to see it destroyed as well. I think it adds a little character to the house. And I mean, why take it away if it's not hurting anything?
I really agree with that. I like that garage. It's just that the fact that it comes in off of a flag part of a flag lot, and then they build a house that is measurably large in front of it. To me, the cumulative effect of the garage remaining there and then coming in with the house the size that they've come in with has a deleterious effect on the lot as a whole that I just can't endorse. I think it's a slippery slope when we start saying, look at the house next door, that takes up X amount of the lot, and then you come in and say, well, now we're going to leave the garage there and we're building a house. It seems to me like they cherry picked, we're going to knock the front house down, but we're not going to touch the garage. And altogether, I think it's just too much mass. You really can't hide it in the back when you're keeping this 700 square foot structure, which we're all assuming is never going to be used for anything. Not that I have any doubt at all that the testimony presented was completely upfront. But the fact is that it's an accessory building that's not even being used as a garage. So it's sort of like one of those pod things, you know, that people have in their yards. It just doesn't, to me, it doesn't help the application.
But Pat, lot coverage is significantly below what's required.
Well, that may be true, but I think that it cuts the air and the light when you're coming in from Kemp. They're already taking the square footage of that second driveway and really acting as though that is part of the lot itself, when I don't really see it that way. I look at it as much closer to an R5 sized lot than an R10 lot. So I understand we just have a different way of looking at this particular situation.
Mr. Chiavetti.
I kind of agree with Pat as far as the size of the lot is concerned, and when you do compare it to an R5, but you got to look at the fact that that's a 1,500 square foot flag piece of lot there that doesn't really function to support the mass of the main structure, you know, and at that point, if you're comparing it to the R5, then I think you gotta consider your calculations based on 1,500 square feet less of total lot area. I hate to see the garage go. You know, used to play in the attic of the garage there 45 years ago, and that doesn't have any bearing on the application, but you know, it's certainly sentimental. I initially felt like a new build should certainly comply with the front yard setback, but then when I looked at where the other houses on the street are, it would actually look significantly farther back from the street than the others if you were to push it all the way back, including those front steps. I don't have a large issue with the front yard setback. They did compare the oversized nature of the floor area that they're proposing to the house next door, which they said is on a smaller lot, and that's true, but that house next door is about 22 feet wide and 60 feet deep. So I think if you want to take credit for having something that's not quite as much mass, you have to take it with looking at the fact that you're also not complying with the side yard setbacks of the R10A and just barely eking out of the R5.
Now, didn't we give a variance for that house, and wasn't that a renovation?
There was another one, but I thought it was farther down.
Maybe so.
I'm not sure, but you know, if you're going to compare apples to apples, you got to look at the fact that house, although oversized, is 22 feet wide and 60 feet deep. It's a shotgun. It's a, you know, there's a rail all the way flat compared to this plan. I think it's an interesting design, but I think that some of the design elements lend to losing some space on the second floor. The amount of hallway that's added in order to make that balcony on the front of the house functional, I think would allow you to get in a lot more bedroom if you had the narrower house. I'm also not sure how, you know, not having a staircase that would go straight front to back would save you much room on the width of the upstairs area there, as opposed to having that 13-foot wide and 8-foot deep well of a staircase. I think that kind of breaks up their ability to economize on space upstairs as far as the width of the house is concerned. But in the end, although the property is unique, I don't feel like that's a I don't feel like that unique shape creates a hardship, and I certainly don't think that a lot being you know, that size creates a hardship. If you compare it to the R5, it would be an oversized lot. That's certainly not a hardship, and it would be over the cap on the R5. And you know, I just I think with a new build, the ability is there to bring things in architecturally to make it more functional at the numbers that are prescribed for the lot.
So I think it's gorgeous. It's truly stunningly gorgeous. And I think it would be a fabulous addition to the neighborhood from the front. And I think you can clearly make an argument with regard to front yard and side yard setbacks. I think that much is clear. This is in the wrong zone. I think that much is easy. So is the rest of it. It's a brand new build, guys. I mean, the idea of granting a side yard variance that doesn't even meet the R5 is just not even close to being okay. And for you to say okay to 2,800 plus 600, who are you going to say no to? I just don't even get it. I'm glad we've spent 2 hours and 20 minutes because that's who we are. But for me, it's not even close. And I'm sorry, because it's a great house. But I do not understand. If we want 2,800, then that should be the rule. It's not. It's 2,200. And I appreciate Mr. Turner's argument about making the house and trying to figure it out. That's because he started wanting to build a 3,200 square foot house in an R10A zone. And so that is difficult. But if you start with an R5, which is what this is, you can build a 4-bedroom home. And that's what it is. It's just not every house fits on every lot. And I do think you have to look at that garage in the back, not because we should ask them to take it down, but because you start with a garage that's twice as large as any other detached garage in town. It sits on a piece of the lot. It has, the entire paved front, and it's relevant. And so to ask for all the extra house on top of that, I don't get it. Anyway, does anyone have a motion?
Well, may I stop you there? I'd like to consult my client and talk about perhaps coming back with the amendment to the application.
Mr. Sardo, with all due respect, I mean, we've had the discussion. You asked for us to vote in favor. You've now heard us deliberate. I mean, to stop here because you've calculated the votes, I mean, that's really not the way it goes. Is there something you've learned in this discussion that you didn't hear before?
Well, yeah, no, I think I requested the polling of the board to find out the clarity about the difference of the opinion between the width in relation to the size of the house and how those comments were, it wasn't quite clear to me, and I've heard some comments, but, perhaps that was my mistake in where we were going here. But, certainly I see where this go, and I wanted to consult my client and recommend to them that we should, having the benefit of these discussions, modify the design. And
all right, well, if we're going to do that, I don't agree with where it is relative to a D or the cap. The fundamental issue here is whether or not you can comply. And when you start over, you can comply. And so as the board members consider whatever the redesign is, we'll have to figure out whether or not there's reasons to grant a variance for a house that's larger than what the maximum is in the zone that conforms with the side yard setbacks. Mr. Sardo, you're going to ask us whether or not we're willing to carry. Is that the request?
that is the request.
Okay. Anybody have an objection to that?
I object to that just because we've spent all night on this application and there's not a big problem since these poor guys are going to have to go and redesign it anyway. I don't really see a reason for not taking a vote and putting it on the record.
I do see reasons, namely a new application, new fees, new additional time. We have spent this much energy. It's going to be more energy and time if we have to start over again in an application process. So I will leave you with that. I appreciate your comment.
Just to that point, I mean, my thought is if they were to come in with a new application, wouldn't we have to make a determination as to whether it's materially different? And I mean, that's more deliberation that we're going to have on this. And so it's something to think about. But I agree, we've committed a lot of time on this.
You think they're going to come in with an application that's not materially different after listening to our conversation?
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that, but
yeah, that's a fair point.
Pat, I get it. I didn't even try and hide my reaction to the request. But at the end of the day, this is a resident. You don't want to put them back at the beginning of the line. You don't want them to spend money that they don't have to. Go ahead.
My concern really is that I think I can speak, I guess, just for myself. I would benefit from starting fresh as opposed to dealing with an amendment to an application which had gone through so many manifestations already that I had a hard time following the changes and the presentation in some ways. I would be better able to do it if we started anew. So that's how I feel about it.
All right, look, we can vote on this. Does anybody else feel strongly that they want to vote and they do not want to carry?
I would agree with Patricia. We spent a lot of time here. I think we've had good conversations. I don't ever recall getting to this point and being asked to carry after it's clear sort of a polling was going on. I don't know if Mr. Irene has any insights on what we should do or not. And I agree we're a community and everybody wants to get along, but I would agree. I would think somebody should come up with a motion one way or the other, and we should vote on what was presented tonight.
Mr. Irene, you got feedback for us?
It's entirely up to the board how you want to proceed. As I mentioned at the outset on a different matter, when we were talking about withdrawal of applications, we got a letter in a different matter tonight where an applicant wished to withdraw the application. The matter was not concluded. The board said, of course, you withdraw it. And we took a motion to dismiss it without prejudice. And I indicated that I normally wouldn't do a resolution in those circumstances. And it's entirely up to the board. If they wanted to actually vote on the merits because we had commenced that hearing, they could. And I made the analogy of a situation where, and I'm going to take it out of the context of this particular application, where a hearing was concluded, the board was deliberating, and the applicant in the circumstances that I'm describing stood up and said, I withdraw, in an effort to withdraw it before there was a vote so that the matter would be withdrawn essentially without prejudice because the board never got to a vote on the merits. In that case, the board could simply say, no, you're not authorized to withdraw. We're proceeding to the vote, but it's entirely up to the board how you want to proceed here.
All right, look, I'm just going to make a motion. And the reason I'm making a motion is because I want to get to the other application. My motion is going to be to carry at the request of Mr. Sardo. It's a courtesy to Mr. Sardo and it's a courtesy to his client. It is not normal procedure. And this is not going to start being our procedure. We don't poll board members. We don't say, oh, we were close, but not getting there. That's not the way we do it. I've been very frank about what I think relative to the D variance and the cap if you apply the R5 standards, because I really don't like feeling pressure next time, feeling as though the plan has been leaning into what the comments were. But that being said, I'm going to err on the side of courtesy and I'm going to make the motion to carry it 2 months. As long as they can be ready in 2 months. Mr. Sardo, you need more time?
No, I don't believe so. That's fine.
I'll second.
Roll call when you're ready, Sandy.
So what date are we carrying to December 2nd?
Yes.
Okay.
I assume that, I'm sorry, I assume that agenda is open at current?
It is.
Thank you.
Mrs. Quigley,
No.
Mr. Ridgway,
No.
Mr. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. Ledman,
Yes.
Dr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Chiavetti,
Yes.
and Mr. Leader.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Let's hurry up and get to the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Sardo. Okay, I don't have my agenda up. What's the name on the next one? There we are. Next one is Stevens. I see Mr. Marchese's here. Please, if you're with Mr. Marchese, please raise your hand and we'll bring you forward.
But before we do that, Mr. Chairman, we're just going to get a stipulation from Mr. Sardo extending time which the board has to act through the meeting following, the regular meeting following the December 2, 2021 meeting of the board. Mr. Sardo? Ms. Sardo, you're muted. Mr. Sardo, can you hear me?
He's frozen.
You frozen?
Yes.
They might have hopped off.
Okay, we'll go from there. Thank you.
Todd, can we get a 2-minute bathroom break?
I'm so glad you asked
I
for
was
it.
gonna ask too. Thank you.
Thank you.
When we had court reporters, that was changing the paper. We have to change the paper.
I assume that those that are dark will not be dark as soon as they're back. Is that what I'm to assume? Mr. Irene is hiding. Adam's hiding.
I'm back.
Is back.
Sorry,
All right,
I
very
am
good.
Instead of my video.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We lose somebody? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No, we just lost our ability to count. Sandy, could we do a roll call, please?
Sure. Mrs. Quigley,
Yeah.
Mr. Ridgway, Mr. Ryan,
Here.
Mr. Ledman,
Here.
Dr. Lawfer,
Here.
Mr. Chiavetti, and Mr. Leader.
Here. I see John Sardo is with his hand up. I assume he's going to reply to Mr. Irene's question now.
So I'm going to bring him back in.
Yeah, please. Did it not work?
Don't know.
All right.
He left the attendee side though.
Let's just undo it. You've got Robert Marchese, you've got Doug Stevens and Ron Graham are all raising their hands. I assume they're all together on the next application.
Yep. So we're bringing in the next applicant,
Yes, please.
Mr. Stevens first.
Mr. Chairman, this is the Stevens matter, 108 Lewis Lane. I'm going to swear in Ms. Gable, our professional planner. You do swear?
Mr. Sardo just came in, sorry.
It's okay. You back, Mr. Sardo? We thought.
I apologize.
No, that's quite all right. We thought you either left or were frozen. But I was just, as we were kind of cutting out, I was just asking for an extension of time which the board has to act on your matter through the next regularly scheduled meeting after that December 2 meeting.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Sorry for leaving too early. Apologize about that.
That's quite all right. Have a good night.
Thank you.
And back to the Stevens matter, 108 Lewis Lane. I'm going to swear Ms. Gable, our professional planner. You do swear testimony, give this board to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
We'll let Mr. Marchese put his appearance on the record, and I think, Mr. Chairman, we have a couple completeness waivers on this item as well.
Great. Did we pull Mr. Marchese forward?
And while we're doing that, Mr. Chairman, I indicate for the record, I reviewed the notice materials. They appear to be in order. So unless someone raises their hand to raise an issue or a question or a problem with regard to the notice materials, the board has jurisdiction to hear and consider the matter. Sandy, can you tell if there's anyone responding to my inquiry? Does anybody have any questions, issues, or problems on the notice materials on the Stevens matter, not the merits of the case? Any issue with regard to the notice?
There's no response.
All right, the board has jurisdiction to hear and consider matter. Do we have Mr. Marchese?
Mr. Stevens, are you in communication with Bob? Is he there? You're on mute, sir.
Mr. Stevens, you're muted. Can you hear us?
Try that.
There you go. Is Mr. Marchese available?
He is. He's in the room with me.
Oh, okay. Do you want to, there he is. So we're going to let Mr. Marchese put his appearance on the record, and we're going to do some completeness waivers.
Hello.
So, Mr. Marchese, we're going to let you put your appearance on the record, and then we're going to address completeness waivers. Can you hear me, Mr. Marchese?
Is there a reason Mr. Turner's back?
A quick note from Mr. Soto Sardabadio to give permission to delay action, but.
Yeah, he actually came back on, Mr. Turner, and stipulated to an extension of time. So thank you.
Okay, very sorry.
That's quite all right. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
And we have Robert Marchese, who's appearing on behalf of the applicants, Douglas and Amanda Stevens. Hello, Mr. Marchese. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, maybe we can turn it over to Ms. Gable so we can do the completeness waivers.
Sounds good.
Okay, so completeness waivers. Some of the usual ones, Monmouth County Planning Board application. The applicant requested a waiver. We recommend a waiver be granted since the property does not front on a county road. The next waiver is for the Freehold Soil Conservation District. The applicant requested the waiver. We recommend the waiver be granted for completeness. Monmouth County Health Department. we recommend the waiver be granted. It's not applicable. And then the applicant also requested a waiver for the number of copies of 20 prints. However, we recommended the applicant provide the number of copies as requested by the board secretary prior to appearing before the board. I believe this has been addressed. Sandy, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then as for application guidelines, the applicant requested a waiver for the attic access shown on the plans. And we recommend, that the waiver be granted by the board. We do note that there is an attic access shown, but the label of the type is not provided. So we just recommend that the applicant provide testimony during the hearing to explain that and to add it to any revised plans. And then the other waiver the applicant requested is the key map of all properties within 200 feet. The applicant actually resubmitted the 200-foot map that we include in our memo as part of their application. And so we recommend that the waiver be granted for completeness purposes unless the board feels otherwise.
Ms. Gable, isn't this 2 exterior additions to the home? Isn't that the proposal?
Correct. There's a couple of minor improvements having to do with the location of bay windows and extending out the front porch. So there is some slightly increased habitable floor area, but for the most part, I believe it's all bulk variances.
I'm just trying to understand whether or not architecturals were needed and just trying to make sure that we didn't require an as-built to be drawn if that wasn't necessary. But anybody have a problem with the waivers? Looks like no. We need a motion, Mr. Ernst?
Please.
I move to accept all the waivers. I need a second and a quick roll call, please.
Second,
Mrs. Quigley,
yes.
Mr. Ridgway, Mr. Ryan, Mr. Ludman,
Yes.
Dr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Chiavetti,
Yes.
Mr. Leader.
Yes.
And Mr. Chairman, we had a survey prepared by Michael, middle initial L, Romans, ROMANS, PLS, dated December 18, 2011. We'll mark that A-1. And we have floor plans and elevations prepared by Ron Grammer, GRAMMER, AIA, 3 sheets, March 1, 2021, revised through July 30, 2021, assuming I have the last revision date. We'll mark that A-2 and we'll turn it over to Mr. Marchese.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Irene, others. Thank you to take this application at this late hour. It's very much appreciated. It's straightforward. We believe a variance is required specifically to the side setback, the new variance. We believe it's straightforward. I'm going to just briefly ask a few questions of Mr. Stevens, who is present here in my office with me. And just to set the groundwork for Mr. Grammerman's testimony, which I will try to truncate due to this hour and move this along. Mr. Stevens, are you the owner of the property in question, 108 Lewis Lane?
Yes.
The survey is dated 2011. Has there been any change to the boundaries of the property? Or
Mr. Marchese, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you. We're going to swear in Mr. Stevens, though.
Oh,
So,
I'm sorry.
Mr. Stevens, give us your full name, spell your last, and your address for the record, please.
Sure, it's Douglas Charles Stevens. It's STEVENS, 108 Lewis Lane.
If you'd raise your right hand, you do swear in testimony to give the board will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but truth.
I do.
Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Marchese.
Mr. Stevens, just briefly, the survey from 2011, were there any changes from that survey based upon boundary lines or the footprint of the house to the present time?
No.
Was the house in the existing position when you bought the house in 2011?
Yes.
What's the purpose of this current application that you have before this board, sir?
It has two purposes. One is to update the look and the outside of the house, and the other is to resolve what I feel has been a longstanding safety issue with the top step of the front entryway, as well as the garage and the side entryway.
Mr. Stevens, any change to attic access whatsoever as to what currently exists?
No,
Okay. Any changes to the existing building height?
no.
With regards to the side
What
of the
exists
house?
with regard to the attic access, Mr. Stevens? What is it?
Yeah, so it's a kind of a quirky thing. It's almost like a cabinet hatch that's in the boys' bathroom that you have to kind of climb up into and then climb up into the attic.
So it's pull down stairs or
No,
ladder? Ladder?
no,
It's a hole, right? It's a hole that you have to move the panel and then set a ladder up to climb into it.
no, but it's almost like a cabinet door that you open up, and then it's probably about 4 feet off the floor itself in the bathroom. So you kind of have to just put your knee up in there, and then there's a little landing, and then you got to climb up again.
And it's used only for storage purposes, the attic.
We don't use it for anything. It's purely for access if we had to do something. Yeah,
Thank you.
electrical or I don't know.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Stevens, with regards to the side of the house, what proposed changes are you proposing with regards to the doorway on the side of the house?
The idea is to, again, update the exterior, update the doorway, but to add a small overhang above the doorway to shed ice and snow away from that entryway.
Now, as part of this application, we submitted a number of photos. Is that correct, Mr. Stevens?
Yes,
And do a number of photos show the house as it exists today?
yes,
And there's approximately 5 photos in total that show the house as they exist today?
yes.
I'd like to have them marked just for this sake of continuity of the testimony. Everyone should have a copy of them. 5 photos of the house, front view and side view.
Do you want to mark them collectively, Mr. Marchese?
Yeah, let's do that.
All
Let's mark
A3?
A3 collective. Mr. Stevens, when were those approximate 5 photos taken?
There was 2 that represent the top step or the top landing of the front entryway. Those were taken on February 8th and 9th of this year, 2021.
Well, those 2 were with regards to the ice condition, correct?
The ice condition,
I'm
yeah.
asking about the other ones that have been marked as A3 with regards to just a view of the
I
house.
wasn't sure what you're including there. Okay, yeah, those are taken later in the year. They were taken on May 2nd.
Since you mentioned the 2 photos with regards to the ice condition that were provided for the sake of clarity as to the condition, when were those 2 photos, if we may, Ms. Irene, have them marked collectively, the 2 photos as A4?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Stevens, when were those 2 photos taken?
They were taken on February 8th and 9th, 2021.
Thank you, sir. Okay. With regards to the side of the house in which we are talking about adding a cover, if you're standing in front of the house, would that be to the left of the house or to the right of the house?
It's on the left of the house as you're facing the front.
Okay. And what changes, if any, are being made to the entrance and exit on the side of the house?
Yeah, just the replacement of that entry doorway and then adding that raised seam roof overhang with brackets
And once again,
to that entryway.
once again, what is the purpose of that?
The purpose is to shed water, snow, and ice material away from that entryway.
Mr. Stevens, we've also included, which I like to have marked as A5, 2 photos showing the type of material and look of what you are proposing for the covers for both the front entrance, front garage, and the side entrance. Those two photos were taken by you?
Yes,
Okay, and they showed basically the style and type of material that you propose to be using?
correct.
How many neighbors do you have to the left of the house if you're standing in front?
Just the one neighbor to our left.
And is there any vegetation between yourself and that one neighbor?
There is a beautiful, very mature, very tall laurel hedge that runs along that side of the property.
And is your intent to maintain that hedge along the side of that property?
Absolutely.
Does this application in any way propose any changes to the driveway?
No.
At this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Grammerman to be sworn in. And I'd like to qualify him as a expert in the field of architecture.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to go through the witnesses before you address each one? Any questions from the board members or interested parties?
No, we can move right to Mr. Grammer.
Okay. Mr. Grammer, if you give us your full name, spell your last, your address for the record, please.
Ron Grammer, Grammer, 241 Maple Avenue in Red Bank.
If you raise your right hand, do you swear any testimony you give the board to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Grammer. Are you licensed to as an architect in the state of New Jersey?
Yes, I am. 15 years now.
Can you just run through some of your educational qualifications and whether you've testified in front of this board and been qualified as an expert
Sure.
previously?
I have a master's degree in architecture from the University of Maryland. I'm a LEED accredited professional. I have an NCARB certificate. I'm licensed in New Jersey, and this is my third time presenting before this board in the past year.
Have you also been qualified in front of other boards as well?
Throughout Monmouth and Ocean counties.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Irene, I ask that Mr. Grammer be deemed an expert in the field of architecture.
Any objections? Sounds good, Mr. Marchese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Grammer, did you prepare plans revised with the date of July 30th, 2021 with regards to this application?
I did.
Are they 3 pages in total?
Yes.
Can you please run through the plans with regards to your drawings?
The first sheet labeled A 1.0 shows the property survey with my annotations on it depicting the front covered porch, the overhang over the garage, the overhang over the side entry, and the new proposed rear deck. The second sheet, A 1.1, shows the floor plans for the house, interior and exterior. I'm sorry, interior, first floor and second floor. And sheet A 2.0 shows all 4 elevations of the house, front, sides, and rear, showing those proposed changes.
So the side photo, 8.20, where the variance is sought with regards to the side setback in this R30 zone property. Is there modifications that are going to be made to that doorway there?
Yes, the side entry currently is a sliding type door. We're changing that to a single swinging door with a pair of awning windows on either side.
Okay. And this is in fact an A30 zone?
Yes.
R30,
R30.
R30, good. Good for that. Did you discuss with the Stevens the potential materials to be used for the coverings for the front entrance, the garage, and the side entrance as well?
Yeah, the objective was to update the exterior appearance of the house, use standing seam metal roof on all the new roofs, and add I'll call it a stone water table on the lower section of the front entrance and around the stairs, and horizontal siding on the balance of the house.
With regards to the cover for the front door, does that extend past the steps?
No.
With regards to the cover for the garage, how far does that extend out, sir?
30 inches, but not past the front step.
Okay. How far approximately does the front step stick out?
The front steps protrudes 5'10" and the covering over the garage would be 2'6". So almost twice, more than twice as far.
Okay, and there's no proposed changes to the front steps themselves with regards to this application, is that correct?
Just the application of stone veneer.
Okay, with regards to the side entrance, can you spend a moment with regards to how far that's going to be sticking forward from the building line?
Again, for consistency, the overhang protrudes 30 inches from the side of the house.
About how long is that overhang going to be?
Well, the side yard setback currently is 17.4 feet. With the 30-inch overhang, you'll be at 14.8 feet.
Variance is triggered with regards to that side setback. So do you have an opinion as to a potential reason why the variance might be triggered with regards to the side setback?
Required side yard setback is 20 feet. However, the width of the property is only 100 feet, where 125 is required in that zone. So a 25-foot discrepancy or difference makes it difficult to have the proper side yard setback.
What is the total square footage for this lot, sir?
30,000 square feet is required. The lot currently is 28,867 square feet. So we're deficient by 1,200 square feet.
With regards to the side covering, you indicated how far it was going to be sticking from that building line of the structure. How long is it going? For what distance is it going to run along the building line itself?
It extends from the house 30 inches and it's 6 feet in width.
Okay, thank you, sir. With regards to the requirements for the variances, any other changes or the variances triggered with regards to any other changes other than what you've discussed so far?
No, just front and side yard setbacks.
And what's the effect of the covering on the front yard setback?
The existing front yard setback, the requirement is 50 feet. It's currently 40 feet, 0.4 inches or 40.4 feet to the steps. We're not going past that because we're simply covering the existing front entrance steps. So we're not making the condition worse.
Okay, so the front yard setback was already a non-conformity?
Correct.
What's the setback to the proposed cover? Do you have that, Mr. Grammer, just so I can get it? The front cover?
43. So to the first step, it's 40.4 feet. To the overhang, it's 43.2 feet.
43.2 feet to the overhang. And how about the cover added to the garage? Do you have the front yard setback for that, just so I can get that number?
The garage currently is 49 feet, and to the overhang, it's 46.5 feet.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Marchese, Mr. Grammer, I'll take advantage of the break in the action here. I'm going to refer you to A1, please. And as I'm looking at the site plan as it's laid out, I just want to make sure I fully understand. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new appendages to the exterior of the structure. Is that correct, that I'm seeing those shaded areas as the new additions?
Correct.
Okay. The deck in the back is fully conforming. We're not talking about that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And now I'm coming around to the front from that side, from the deck. That first new bump out, whatever that is, a bay window or something, is that behind the front yard setback? Do we need a variance for that?
No, we do not need a variance for that. That's behind the front yard setback.
So that one's clear. The next is a roof that goes over the existing front steps. The roof is going to be no further than the existing front steps. That requires a variance, correct? Based on the dimensions already given?
Correct.
Okay, and then right above the garage, you've got a new roof area that's going to be there. That requires a variance, correct?
Correct.
And then when we move around to whatever side of the house that is, there's that one last roof that's going on that's going to violate the side yard setback, correct?
Correct.
All right, so we have 3 new additions violating 2 violating the front and 1 violating the side yard setback.
Yes.
There's no other deviations from the standards, interior renovations all fully conform. Any other renovations that you're doing to the house trigger no additional variances, correct?
Correct.
That's summed up the testimony of the architect. Essentially, this application.
You can break a record, Mr. Marchese. Is that your goal tonight?
That is a very admirable goal, and if I could certainly make that, I certainly would and intend to. So that's essentially the application. You've heard from the applicant, you've heard from the architect, and yes, the variance is triggered here. You know, I could run through some of the criteria. The key issue here is, you know, safety. There is no negative criteria that impacts this application in terms of the look is consistent with the area. The type of material to be used is consistent with what is used also in the area. Area being Fairhaven itself. The nearest neighbor is going to be blocked for the most part from the side setback. I believe that neighbor has one window that looks onto that side setback, and there's that hedgerow between the property lines. So, you know, there's not going to be any negative impact when you look at the positive criteria, first and foremost with regards to the issue of the safety involved here with and the ice condition. This is a non-conforming lot with regards to an R30. It's undersized. And I think the proposals that the Stevens are seeking are reasonable, not overly extensive, and accomplish their objective with minimum impact.
Mr. Marchese, are there any material changes to the exterior of the house? And if so, would you review those?
Well, other than the coverings themselves, those are the ones that trigger the variance request. In the front, I think there's going to be a window box of a flower box of some type. Once again, that's behind the front yard setback. And in the back, there's going to be a new proposed deck, which once again doesn't trigger any variance request or requirement.
Are there any changes to the siding of the house or the appearance of the house?
Yes, there will be, and Mr. Stevens, I think could address that. Doug, do you want to spend a moment on that?
Yeah, so we're going to replace all the siding. So it's going to be kind of that wider hardy board white siding throughout. New trim, new doors and entryways, and new roof.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dr. Laffer, you okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
I just want to confirm, Mr. Marchese, you are presenting a particular look here. You've even gone so far as to show pictures of what that looks going to be. The standing seam roofs that are being presented in both the architecturals and in the examples are in fact what's going to be built, correct?
Yes.
Okay. There is, I think, an argument that the sprucing up of this house, the fact that the house already exists where it sits relative to the setbacks, you know, is a benefit. And I think, you know, when we apply the C2 balancing test, I think we can consider that, although you clearly have hardships as well. But I do think, particularly showing the standing seam as they are, I think is a particularly nice improvement. Anything further with regard to your testimony?
No, I don't want to beat a dead horse over the head. It is what it is.
It's barely dead. How long have you been here? Are you kidding me? We only spent 10 minutes on this. All right. Are there any members?
It's been a pleasure to see everyone.
Likewise. Are there any members of the public that have any questions or like to make any comments with regard to this application? Please use the raise your hand feature. We'll bring you forward. Okay, let the record reflect none. Anything in closing, Mr. Marchese?
once again, I'm going to leave that dead horse alone. It's a straightforward safety issue that causes minimum impact to anyone. And it's done with the minimum intrusion by the Stevens, who want to improve their house for safety and aesthetic looks. That's what, you want to see the citizens of Fairhaven do. If they're going to trigger a variance, make it as have little impact as possible. And I think the Stevens have accomplished that nicely with the help of Mr. Grandma.
Thank you, Mr. Marchese. Discussion?
Yeah, I'll be brief too. I think the changes make sense. I think the appearance of the house will be better, and I have no problem with it.
I think these are very de minimis changes, great improvements that have a clear benefit. I have no issue with them.
Good presentation, right to the point. I would agree with Dr. Lawfer and who was it, Adam? Yeah, thank you so much. Clearly improvements that I think we can all agree are for the benefit of the community and the neighborhood. So well done.
Anyone else?
Nothing to add, great application, and I think it'll certainly be improvement. Anytime you have ice on steps, it's never a good thing.
All right, there's nothing else. Do I hear a motion?
I move that the Stevens application be approved as presented tonight.
Second.
Mrs. Quigley,
Yes.
Mr. Ridgway,
Yes.
Mr. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. Ledman,
Yes.
Dr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Chiavetti,
Yes.
Mr. Leader.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Appreciate it. Good to see you, Bob.
Thank you all very
Good
much.
to see everyone. I just want to thank the board. Thank you. And once again, thank you for all the hard work you guys do as a volunteer. I probably know the type of work you do better than most attorneys that appear in front of you. And I know how hard you work, and I know an evening like tonight is not a rare type of evening for you, but it's a typical type of evening for you, which is why we had the patience to sit and wait. So thank you again, as a citizen of Fairhaven. My pleasure.
Thank you.
You too.
All right.
Right.
Oh, we are without our second in command to run through the administrative things. Who's going to do it?
Mr. Chairman, the first item on the administrative list of items is the Katie resolution.
That's great. Thank you.
Getting late, Mr. Chairman.
That's right. That's
Figured
right.
I would answer the call.
All right, good. Who was there?
I will make a motion to approve the Katie resolution as submitted by Mr. Irene.
Second.
Okay, so let's see. Mrs. Quigley,
Yes.
Mr. Irene, can I ask a question before
Yes,
I
ma'am.
continue my role? I'm only doing the positives for the Katie.
Yes, ma'am. Only
Okay.
those who voted in favor of the action taken are
That's-
allowed to vote on the resolution.
What I wanted to confirm. Mr.
Correct.
Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. Kinsella is not here, so I believe that's it.
Okay, it carries. All we need is a majority of those present who voted in favor of the action. We have two people present. They both voted in favor. That's a majority of those present. The resolution carries. The next item on the chairman, on the administrative list, Mr. Chairman, is the approval of minutes from September 9. And again, the only people who would be eligible to vote on those are those who were present on September 9. I don't know if there's any questions, corrections, modifications, changes to those minutes. Otherwise, does somebody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of September 9th.
Second.
Mr. Chelsea isn't here. Mrs. Quigley,
Yes.
Mr. Ridgway,
Yeah.
Mr. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. Ludman,
Yes.
Dr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Chiavetti,
Yes.
That's it, right?
is that right?
I think that's it, yeah.
And the last item on the administrative list, Mr. Chairman, is tentative dates for 2022 and the reorg, first meeting of 2023. Just obviously initial discussion only, because at the time of the reorganization, the board as reorganized will actually have to vote and adopt the dates for 2022 going forward and the first meeting of January 2023. Those are tentative dates, and I understand they're all the first Thursdays of the month, as I understand it.
We're looking for conflicts with school calendars, holidays, those sorts of things. Anybody see anything problematic?
Mr. Chair, I think sometimes we keep an eye on the dates of the fair and also teachers' convention.
Is fair late August next year?
Not sure.
It's
Okay.
usually it's the last week leading up to Labor Day.
I would also suggest avoiding around Labor Day weekend and maybe going to the next week if others are available for that.
Which would be September
Is that the 8th?
8th, yes.
Anybody have a problem with that?
I think it makes good sense.
Any other adjustments?
January 5th, that's a little close to people getting back from vacation for a Christmas vacation. Would it be reasonable to push that back a week?
Now you're talking about, you understand, we're talking about 2023.
Correct.
Yeah. So the following week would be January 12th.
2023?
Yes, ma'am. You've already noticed for the reorg date for this coming January in the last notice, so that it's already under the Open Public Meetings Act notice when we reorg. So we're looking at the reorg, we're looking at all the dates from February to the end of 2022, plus the reorg in January 2023. It's frightening to say that, isn't it, Ms. Quigley, 2023? Oh, my goodness. So the question is, do you want to look at, obviously subject to the board's reorganization in the coming January, setting the reorg date for 2023 as January 12 instead of January 5?
I'm indifferent.
Same.
Okay. So the suggestion is January 12th. And then the new board can make the final call on that when you reorg in January of 2022.
Sounds good. Do we need a motion on that, or are we good like that?
You really can't do much more with it at this point, Mr. Chairman, because these dates will be the dates that the board adopts, whatever dates the board adopts when it reorganizes January of 2022.
All right, so I'm going off script here. We are going to be having a meeting on October 21st. And to the extent that that's news to you, then let me just explain to you why. There is a land use committee that has been hovering around Fairhaven for a long time. Most recently, the one that's being reconstituted, that was constituted initially maybe up to 3 years ago. The discussion about reconstituting that land use committee was the subject of some debate at council, mainly because there was a difference of opinion with regard to whether or not there would be a public process specific to the discussion of the committee prior to making recommendations to the planning board. The land use committee is charged with reviewing the existing ordinances trying to understand what's working and what's not working. And the committee is charged with making recommendations to the planning board and the council with regard to things that need to be fixed, changed, adjusted, what have you. I invited the council members to have that meeting in our house on the 21st of October. And so we will be having a public meeting jointly with the council on the 21st. That meeting will largely be about receiving public feedback relative to what they see going on in town, what they want to see changed, so that the committee has an opportunity to have that information before they go and try to come up with recommendations. The list of things includes whether or not we should be setting first floor elevation at a maximum height, whether or not we need to redo habitable floor area, whether or not we need to replace habitable floor area with a new system, whether or not setbacks are right, whether or not drainage systems are properly working. There will be some discussion about whether or not the detached garages are working. There's kind of a long list of things that are currently in discussion. The process will be meeting before the zoning board, committee meets, committee makes recommendations to the planning board has a public meeting to consider the things that the committee has recommended. Planning board then makes recommendations to council. Council then considers the recommendations and develops ordinances. Ordinances then get batted back to the planning board. Planning board then comments, sends back to the council for adoption. I will tell you that I am personally very vested in this current process. I've been a part of every committee that's been put together over the last 15 years. I'm very tired. A lot of the things that we're talking about, we've been talking about for all that time. Somebody, I forget which one of you it was, I think maybe it was Marty, sent me a memo that I wrote with Joe Moulet in 2007. And I could have written it yesterday. It was sad, real sad. I'm not kidding about being tired. I'm not kidding about being serious about making sure some things change and things get fixed. And I'm not kidding about not doing this forever. There's a lot more going on. I'd be happy to talk to any one of you offline about it, but I'm not going to talk about it any further here. But I would like to see everybody on the 21st. I would like if everybody could think about what they see and what they feel about what's going on. And I would really like if we could have a very candid discussion. We will focus on trying to draw out of the public whatever we can get. But I specifically invited council to do this here because there's nobody that knows this stuff better than all of you. The planning board does not know it as well as you know it. The things that we went through tonight went slow and fast for a reason. You all understand that. Council really doesn't. Planning board deals with different stuff. And so I think this is an important opportunity to put our thoughts on the record and to welcome the public and to welcome their thoughts so that that can be considered as well.
Todd, are we panelists on this?
Yep. Along with council.
It's going to be Zoom, Todd?
It will be. I do not want to switch back to a live meeting. We had confusion on the Borough Council calendar that this meeting was actually in person. Planning board is live and decided last meeting to stay live, just so you know. But when we make our decision to go back to live, I want to make that decision and stick with it. Certainly happy to talk about that if people are ready to make that decision, but I think we need to wait just a bit myself. We don't want to jump back and forth. It confuses the public.
I guess I'm just curious about what it is that the regular members of the zoning board should be prepared to do at this special meeting. Discuss things with the public or things that we've seen over the time on the board?
So this is really an opportunity to try and figure out where we want to focus the energy of the council regarding fixes. So one of the things that people have noticed, I've not specifically talked to members of this board about it, is that houses are starting to become a lot taller. And so as you stand at the crown of the road, many of the new houses are at eye level or above as for first floor elevation. There's reasons for that. But the real question is whether or not that's okay and whether or not there's something we want to do about it. When the house goes up that high, the grading is brought up around the house and it looks like, it just looks different. It looks like a subdivision. And so, you may be familiar with friends and neighbors and family and whatnot that have problems, looking at new development because they're really throwing all the water off site. We currently have no regulation to stop that. I get calls regularly. How is this possible? And unfortunately, I know exactly how it's possible. But we need to help try and set the standards. We need to try and help everybody recognize what is going on so that council can make a decision as to what they want. I just said it tonight. If you're in an R5 and the number should be 2,800, then that should be the same number for everybody. We should set a single standard that we think is right. And if 2,200 is a standard, then 2,200 is a standard. Not that we don't grant variances, but we grant variances when they're warranted based on a C1, C2, or a D criteria.
What about the zoning map itself?
That's fair game. I believe that there will be two stages to this. I believe that there's some low-hanging fruit. Specifically, there has been a proposal generated by Elena's firm to replace habitable floor area. The proposal is to use a system which starts with a footprint and removes habitable floor area ratio, and the entire D variance from the equation. That is going to be front and center this first round. I think things like the zoning map and whether or not there's a way to fix things, it's interesting. You look at the application on Willow tonight. That's a problem, but I don't see an immediate fix for it because as you move from that lot almost a couple over, the R10 makes as much sense as the R5. But we've had that discussion's been on the table for a long time, and it's certainly open for further discussion, and ideas on how to make it better.
Todd, are elevations being driven by potential flooding areas and elevating the ground floors? Is that related to climate change, to the increased likelihood of flooding? And is that something that will be taken into consideration as well?
So there's two factors, I think. The first factor is that a developer, whether it's for a particular client or for a spec home, although we're seeing less and less specs in the market, most of the houses you see going up are already being built for people because the speculative markets become very risky. But people do not want the risk of wet basements or water in their house. And so the safest way to deal with that is to make sure you have positive pitch away from the foundation. There's nothing new about that, but positive pitch of 3 feet is better than positive pitch of 1 feet if in fact you want to be really, really sure. But that's kind of the basic business reason to do it. Developers don't want warranty claims and things like that, but there's a practical reason. We are now requiring in the last 4 years that developers do a groundwater test. And there is a requirement that the slab of the basement needs to be 2 feet above the high water mark. And when they put that test in play, they also want to add on top of that, as you heard tonight, a basement with sufficient height so they can use that space as full living space. So when you add the 2 feet above grade, and then you add, say, a minimum of 9 feet, you are putting a lot of pressure on whether or not you can keep that foundation down below. There are areas in Fairhaven where the water table is very, very high. And we have no restriction right now on first floor elevation. What they do is they measure ridge height from where the original existing grade was, but as long as you can bury it into that 32, 30 feet, 35 feet, depending on where you are, you can grade up to it. You can not grade up to it. And unless that basement comes out at 51%, it's still considered a cellar and it doesn't count. And so you can have up to 5 feet exposed if that basement's 10.5 feet tall. Those decisions are not being made for climate change per se. In Rumson, after the change to the flood maps after Sandy, they did implement a 5 foot, as I understand it, sort of fluff factor, on ridge height. So they went from 35 to 40 if you're in the flood zone so that people could raise their houses up and out. I have not seen that be a factor on anything that's been brought to my attention in Fairhaven.
No, but there have been comments made that the ridges are getting flatter and flatter and flatter because as you're pulling up the bottom, you're flattening out the top and it's sort of getting kind of yucky looking compared to the houses that have been around for a while. But I wonder if it would be possible for Alina's firm to distribute that proposal so that we can do some homework.
No. That is not a public proposal and it's with the committee and it would only be circulated once there's some sort of a decision to be made as to how to deal with that. You know, we're a town without a mayor right now and without some level of leadership. But that was a memo that was specifically drawn at the request of the business administrator. And I wouldn't even start to begin interfering with when that will become public.
Okay.
But for our purposes from the board, because it is our meeting, although a joint meeting, I'm going to assume that we have enough people that are going to attend that we at least have a quorum that night. At least 4 people will be there. Is that correct? Everybody's nodding. Yes. Good. Thank you.
So what's going to be the format of that? Are proposals going to be made and then we're going to discuss them? Or how do we interface with the issues that come up?
It's a cocktail party. We're gonna chat. We're gonna talk. There's no structure to it. We're gonna talk and we're gonna welcome the public to talk to us. And we're gonna have a back and forth and a dialogue. The request that we have this meeting has been from the council members that thought it important that there be an opportunity for the public to engage before the next steps are implemented. Those next steps will be a recommendation from that committee to send ideas to the planning board. That planning board meeting will also be public and there'll be an opportunity for public feedback at that point. And the planning board will have further input. And then it'll go to council and there'll be public discussion at that point too.
So it's discussion and there's no issues being decided or determined. It's strictly a matter of collecting data and discussing issues.
Yeah, Dr. Laufer, just to make it clear, this zoning board is not anywhere within the MLU a part of things like this. This is only happening because I believe that the members of this board are very well tuned into what these issues are. And I think that it's a benefit that we do this here. And I offered. So this is really extracurricular, if you will. The actual process of creating new ideas will go through the council and the planning board standard course per the MLUO.
Yeah, and to follow on Todd's comments, generally the only role that the zoning board has in these kinds of things is our annual report. So good segue there. If we haven't done it yet, and I don't remember that we did, it's something we want to keep in mind because the year is growing short.
So Pat did a great job with last year's annual report. And Pat, I actually talked to Marty about trying to take a look at the annual reports and seeing what information the zoning board's produced over the last 15 years, as far back as I go. And I actually think we started doing annual reports for if not the first time, we restarted that process. I don't think they've been doing them. So one of the things that we could do at the meeting, I hope we do to an extent, is review the things that we've talked about historically to make sure that those issues are on the radar.
Fun.
Hey, I mean, what we do is super important. This is going to set in motion things that are going to affect what happens for the next 15 years. I recently spent a lot of time with the Rumson Estates case, which was a 2003 decision of the Supreme Court, which affirmed our right to use floor area ratio in Fairhaven. That's not that long ago. And it was amazing to me to go back and realize how recently it was. So these things really matter. I know you know that.
What was the date and time again? I'm sorry.
What was the what, John?
Date and time?
The meeting time? Regular time. The 21st of October, 7:15.
So it's a meeting that it's a meeting date that we had already given Open Public Meetings Act notice for. So
Right.
Essentially Todd is inviting the governing body and interested parties to attend our meeting. But I understand that the somebody on behalf of the governing body will issue whatever Open Public Meetings Act notice is required for them to the extent that that they will have a quorum, but I leave that to them. This is one of our regularly scheduled meetings in accordance with that last supplemental Open Public Meetings Act notice we issued, I believe, as I recall.
I'm sorry, you broke up there, the 21st?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the in-between meetings that we've already set. We took advantage of an open slot that we already had. You know, we didn't have applications, we weren't taking them, you know, for those extra meetings, but I decided to utilize the fact that that had already been planned. I do want to note that we need to get the word out, and I see Betsy is on, I see Susan is on, and that's probably Ruth Blazer is on. We want people there. We want people to know. We really do want a lot of people to engage in this. I think that it would benefit whether they have comments or just want to listen. I'll be pounding that drum all the way through the process.
As far as the annual report goes, would there be somebody who would be interested in doing it or working with me to do it? The remarks part of it? Anybody? Marty? You've been doing some homework on it?
Sure, Pat, I'll help.
Good. That would be great.
So what I would recommend is, Sandy, we used to have sort of this stuff kept as we went. Did you get any of those things from Judy? Any of the information she pulled together and would keep as the months went on?
I was just looking in our files and I saw the 2019 annual report that I think Mrs. Quigley worked on. And I've been keeping a spreadsheet since I've been here, thanks to Mr. Irene suggesting that I do that with the hopes that that would help with pulling together this year's. But what I don't see is the 2020 one, which I guess is the one that we're referencing before. So I'm going to have to go back and see what's there and how far anyone did anything on it.
What I might suggest, Sandy, is we get either one, 2019 or 2020, because then you have the template of all the zones.
Right.
And then what you do is, being that you're doing the notice of action, notice of decisions and action taken each month, you can snatch out of each of those monthly notices the ultimate determination that the board has made on the various applications. And you just need to kind of plug them in under each zone. And then Pat and Marty are going to be working on the recommendations section for the end. So it's kind of a process that we repeat every year using the same template. And being that you're doing those notices every month, you have the data to then plug into the annual report.
And I thank you for that.
Anybody have anything else?
Have we received any reply to Mike's letter to the borough attorney about the riparian buffer? And if not, is he going to be attending this meeting on the 21st along with council?
The borough attorney? Not likely.
Have we gotten a reply to Mike's letter?
No, we have not.
We read another one?
No. Look, I not under my signature, but there's a lot going on right now. And, you know, I recognize that that's an important issue and we're on the record and we don't have to forget about it. And it can be front and center in our report. We can do a lot of things. But one of the things that I know from having so many people that I've worked with that have cycled through council is that there is a bandwidth issue. You know, we lost a good mayor a month ago, a man that had dedicated 10 years into running this town. You don't have to agree with everything he did, but I think we can all sort of connect with his spirit of participation and his love for Fairhaven. There is a lot of chaos going on in terms of figuring out now how to deal with stuff. There's a lot of change. Anyway, the point is, Al, that I think it's a little tone deaf to take an issue that is, you know, sort of just really narrow and say this is something you really need to look at right now. I just don't think there's that capacity. And for that matter, the entire land use discussion is difficult to prioritize, you know, but for the fact that, I mean, I guess one of the things that's probably worth noting is that when we were dealing with the affordable housing discussions, and I don't know to what extent everybody's familiar with that, but I was a participant. We were unable to do anything with regard to zoning or anything else. The restaurant committee, I was involved. We had recommendations. We couldn't come forward with any of those things because we were in the middle of litigation. That's now all behind us. The M&M application is actually pending scheduling with the planning board. So that building is ready to be started. But anyway, the litigation's over. So we're now free to have discussions that have been building up over the last 2 or 3 years. So that's all happening at a really weird time with no leadership, a new mayor to come in for a short period of time, and a lot of sort of people trying to find their way in terms of how they're going to focus our stuff. And I just don't think it would be in good taste, to be more vocal with regard to that issue. And that's not to say it's not important.
I think a nice broad approach is good at this point in time with the chaos, because it can begin to build a consensus towards moving forward in whatever happens with the municipal government over the next couple of years. Whoever's on the council could benefit from some input.
For sure. One of the things that's happening is that there's a lot of public commentary with regard to some of these houses. If you live next door to them, any one of them, you know what the impact is. And those residents are becoming very vocal as to wanting to know how this can be done and why this is being done. And they are really upset about the impact to their property as a result of these things. And so part of this is trying to figure out whether or not, we're going to leave everything alone or whether or not we're going to do something. But it's reached a fevered pitch, which is very distracting to the administration because they're dealing with questions and things that, is their responsibility. But nobody seems to really understand. Nobody really seems to be satisfied with the answer of it's fully conforming. So it's being built in accordance with the rules and it's fine, because they're looking at it, they're like, it's not fine.
And there's a ton of new people in town too. So they will presumably be looking to do stuff to their houses, which could benefit from some changes in the ordinance, perhaps.
Look, we got 6,000 residents. We're turning houses one house at a time. I mean, I've never done the math on how many houses have changed since I started paying attention 15 years ago, but it's hundreds for sure.
Well, there's hardly any old people left.
I'm getting older every day, Pat. I don't know.
They can't afford to live here.
Browns Lane, when I moved on to Browns Lane, it was one big field, and it is just.
Yeah, crazy.
Well, look, these are all important topics. The taxes are important topics. The way things change are important topics. The way that we participate in this community is by being here on nights like tonight, but on taking further opportunities to communicate with the council and planning board and other important members of our community about what we see, so that we can try and make sure that good things are done to preserve this community for our kids. That's what this is about. And so it's a long process to turn a battleship and make these sorts of changes, but that's where we are. Somebody's at the wheel and tugging.
Good.
Anything else?
Thank you, Todd.
Happy to talk to any offline if you have any further questions. Look forward to seeing everybody on the 21st. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Good night.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Be well.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Sandy.